My name is Lisa, a 35-year-old part-time worker, living with my husband Mark and our daughter Emma. Mark works in an office and Emma is in first grade. We purchased an old single-family home and are still paying off the mortgage together. When Emma started elementary school, I began working part-time. Mark is the eldest son, but his younger sister Nancy married before us and settled somewhat comfortably in their parents' house, living with their father. My father-in-law seemed open to anyone taking over the house, except Nancy, who claimed it as hers, stating, "I'll take care of Dad, so I'll take the house." When Nancy got married and moved into her parents' house, her mother had already passed away, leaving her father in good health, so she didn't have to care for him. The house was large, and I remember being surprised when I first visited it before getting married. It had a splendid gate and an expansive plot of land, which made me ask Mark, "Could it be that your parents are wealthy?" During our dating days, Mark never gave the impression of being wealthy, but the grandeur of his parents' house was quite a shock. Mark denied it, but the interior of the house was equally impressive, surprising me even more. According to Mark, his grandfather had been wealthy. The family faced financial difficulties during his father's generation. He chuckled, explaining that while the house left by his grandfather was large, it was old and uncomfortable to live in. Mark assured me when we got married that since Nancy would take care of their father, I would never have to worry about it. Our plan was to let Nancy inherit the house for taking care of him, so we bought our current house. Even from my father-in-law's perspective, he seemed more comfortable being looked after by his daughter than his daughter-in-law should he become bedridden and need care in the future. However, during visits for Christmas or summer holidays, Nancy often mistreated her father. She treated him as an outcast during meals, and if Mark or I tried to join them, she would angrily assert, "Dad likes to eat alone. Don't you fear." After meals, when I went to my father-in-law's room to talk, he expressed his dissatisfaction with Nancy. "I don't want to live in this house because Nancy gets in the way," he confided. According to him, he always eats separately from Nancy's family and receives fewer side dishes, despite Nancy receiving a decent amount of money for living expenses from his pension. Nancy had promised to take care of her father but doesn't do his laundry or much housework in general. My father-in-law ends up doing most of the cleaning inside the house and takes care of all the gardening himself. Even Nancy's husband and children, who live with them, don't treat my father-in-law with respect. When he once asked Nancy's husband for a ride to the horse race track on his day off, since my father-in-law doesn't drive, he was dismissed rudely. "I'm not your chauffeur. If you want to go to the races, use a taxi. If you have money to waste on horse racing, contribute it to living expenses," Nancy's husband retorted dismissively. My father-in-law tried to brush it off as a light-hearted comment, but he was strongly reprimanded. Nancy's 10-year-old son also behaves disrespectfully, teasing my father-in-law with cheeky remarks like, "Grandpa, stay away, you smell. Don't leave your room," despite it having lived together since birth. It seems my father-in-law has no memory of ever holding him. In contrast, when my daughter visits, he dotes on her, hinting at his loneliness. Hearing such melancholic words, I started feeling sorry for my father-in-law. Every time we visit their house, my husband gets upset, urging Nancy to treat their father better. In response, my sister-in-law angrily retorts at my husband, "I am treating Dad just fine. Are you trying to steal this house from me? I won't let this house go to anyone," my sister-in-law declared defiantly. My husband remarked to me later, "It's scary how obsessed my sister-in-law is with the house." Then, my father-in-law had a fall at home. The house, not equipped for the elderly, caused him to trip over a small step, fracturing his right hand in the process. Thankfully, he sustained no other injuries and didn't require hospitalization. However, the fracture severely limited his ability to use his dominant hand, making everyday tasks challenging. When we visited him, we were shocked to see how frail he had become. Not only could he not use his right hand, but moving around was also difficult. It was evident he needed care. However, my sister-in-law's family completely ignored him and didn't take care of him. While he could manage to get to the bathroom on his own, eating was a struggle. My husband confronted my sister-in-law immediately. "Why don't you look after Dad?" he demanded. But my sister-in-law seemed indifferent. "A broken hand is no big deal. Stop making a fuss. He can walk by himself, and he isn't complaining." She shrugged off the concerns. My father-in-law, accustomed to being neglected, seemed unable to stand up for himself against my sister-in-law. She knew it and took advantage of it. My husband was furious. Isn't it obvious? We should take care of our parents, he argued passionately. Mockingly, my sister-in-law smirked at my husband and said, "The same goes for you, right, Mark? You look after Dad. I don't need an old man with barely any money," she sneered callously. I was enraged by how callous my sister-in-law could be towards her own father. Unable to contain myself, I spoke up. "Fine. We will take care of him. If he stays here, he won't heal properly." My husband seemed to agree. We decided to take my father-in-law and move him out of his house immediately. As we packed up his belongings, my sister-in-law started making demands. "Just because you're taking care of Dad doesn't mean you get the house." It became clear that my sister-in-law cared more about the house than her father. My husband responded dismissively, "Don't worry, I already bought a house. I don't need this one. Do whatever you want with it," my husband declared. My sister-in-law seemed relieved to hear his words. As we prepared for my father-in-law's move, neither she nor her husband offered any help. Instead, they keenly searched through his belongings, hoping to find valuable items they could convert into cash. It was clear they had been benefiting from his pension, and with him gone, that would soon end. However, they found no treasures to exploit. When my father-in-law left his house, neither my sister-in-law nor her family bothered to see him off. Their coldness was striking. Upon arriving at our house, my father-in-law seemed to brighten up. He happily played with my daughter, appearing completely different from his time at his own home. We gave him a room that wasn't being used, but since the move was sudden, we hadn't made any preparations. If we had known earlier, we could have renovated, installed handrails, and removed any steps. I apologized to my father-in-law. "Sorry, I wasn't quite prepared. I'll install the handrails and make other adjustments soon." To my surprise, my father-in-law seemed equally apologetic. "My apologies too for making you worry," he said. "I wonder if $200 million will be enough to cover my care and look after my horses." I couldn't help but laugh. Is my father-in-law making jokes like this now? I wondered, noticing his newfound cheerfulness since moving into our home. "Horses, you say?" I chuckled, finding it hard to take seriously such a far-fetched idea of horses and $200 million. Playing along with his jests, I replied, "I'm not sure how much it costs to take care of horses, but taking care of you will definitely cost more." His mention of horses puzzled me, seeming typical of someone wealthy. But when I saw his worried expression at my response, I realized he wasn't joking. Does taking care of a person really cost that much? "All I have left is $200 million, he said seriously. In a panic, I reassured him. My earlier comment was just a joke. $200 million is plenty, more than enough, in fact. I immediately sought my husband for clarification on the horse business and the $200 million. He too was puzzled but recalled his grandfather mentioning wealth from land ownership. "Do you remember my granddad being a wealthy man?" he asked me. "Maybe Dad owned horses," he mused. Together, we approached my father-in-law for the full story. It turned out he had owned horses for years, making frequent trips to the racetrack not to bet but to check on his own horses. He had kept this part of his life secret from his family, so my husband and his sister had no idea. With his broken hand, my father-in-law was now seriously considering his future. He feared that revealing his horse ownership and $200 million in assets to his daughter and son-in-law might lead them to demand it. Perhaps my mention of home modifications had sparked this concern, prompting him to confide in me about his situation. Understanding his worries, my husband cheerfully reassured his father, easing his concerns about the future. "I'm not sure how much it costs to take care of horses, but if you've got $200 million, you should be okay. We'll figure out your caregiving expenses, so just leave it to us," my husband reassured my father-in-law confidently. After confirming with the person who had always looked after the horses that there would be no issues, we put the horse issue to rest. Now knowing that my father-in-law was quite wealthy, I began to see him in a slightly different light. I couldn't help but imagine his daughter's regret for kicking him out despite his considerable assets. The thought brought a sense of satisfaction. Since my father-in-law moved in with us, our lives had changed. Balancing my part-time job and caring for him was hectic, but my husband pitched in, and we managed. With him at home, my daughter found a new conversation partner, and he seemed happier. His walking had improved since moving in, and even before we finished the home modifications, he could walk slowly with the help of a cane. Although his broken hand hadn't healed yet, he was practicing eating with his left hand. Back at his previous home, his nephew would complain whenever he left his room, and he hadn't been very active. Whenever he tried to go to the racetrack, his son-in-law would show annoyance. This lack of activity might have led to his muscles weakening, contributing to his fall. On sunny days, he could now go for walks with the help of my daughter. I had been so focused on my father-in-law's recovery that I had completely forgotten about my sister-in-law. However, 3 months after he moved in with us, my sister-in-law called in a panic. "Is Dad there? If he's there, get him on the phone immediately." At that moment, my father-in-law was out for a walk with my husband and daughter. When I informed her of this, she grew even angrier. "You knew, didn't you? You knew that house was rented. That's why you took Dad to cause problems for us." I couldn't grasp what my sister-in-law meant. She seemed to be suggesting that their house was rented, but she had always boasted that it was theirs, even if the property was still in my father-in-law's name. Calling it a rented house didn't add up. As I struggled to respond, my sister-in-law grew increasingly heated. "Some guy claiming to be the landlord of our family home showed up," she continued angrily, saying I'm behind on rent and that I need to either pay up or get out. Confusion swirled in my head. When she mentioned the landlord of their home, I wondered if my father-in-law had gone to collect rent from my sister-in-law. Just then, my father-in-law returned. I quickly explained the situation and handed him the phone to answer my sister-in-law directly. With a hint of anger in his voice, my father-in-law addressed the daughter who had driven him out of his own home. "Weren't you informed that the house was rented? That house belongs to the company where my father was the CEO. I had been paying the rent until you kicked me out," he explained calmly, yet with a hint of detachment. My sister-in-law, sensing his anger, shouted back through the phone, "I haven't heard anything about this. I'm coming over right now, so wait for me," my sister-in-law declared over the phone. About 30 minutes later, she and her husband arrived, their faces flushed red with surprise at seeing my father-in-law walking on his own. However, there were more pressing issues at hand as my sister-in-law erupted once more. "I thought the house and land belonged to you, Dad. Did you deceive me?" she accused. Grinning at her, my father-in-law calmly responded, "I didn't deceive you. I just kept silent because of how harshly you've been treating me." His comment left my sister-in-law speechless, prompting her husband to intervene. "Setting that aside, can you please hand over the rent? If you don't, we'll be kicked out of the house," he pleaded desperately. "Why should I pay rent for a house where I'm not living after you guys kicked me out? Don't you think that's a bit too much to ask?" My father-in-law countered, laughing off the request. Unable to argue with his reasonable statement, my brother-in-law fell silent. It was then my sister-in-law spoke up again. "Dad, were you planning to deceive us from the beginning, pretending to be injured? You seem far more energetic than when you were living with us," she accused. Stepping in to clarify, I interjected, "That's because he's been doing daily rehab exercises, practicing walking and training to eat with his injured hand." Adding to my explanation, my father-in-law nodded sagely. "I think being kicked out by you guys was a blessing. Ever since I came to live with Mark, we all eat together, and I'm never treated like a nuisance." My sister-in-law and her husband fell silent, jaws clenched, upon hearing this. Just then, my daughter innocently chimed in, "Grandpa, your horse is going to race in the next horse race, right?" Grinning warmly, my father-in-law replied, "It'll be in this Sunday's race. Why don't we go watch it together?" Excitedly, my daughter ran off, but my sister-in-law and her husband seemed to grasp the implications. Hastily, they asked my father-in-law, "Dad, do you own a horse? Are you a horse owner?" With a smug look on his face, my father-in-law finally admitted, "I kept silent because I figured if I told you about money, you'd just take it." Talking about horse racing always gets your husband frowning. My father-in-law's previously jovial face turned stern. His intimidating expression sent chills down my spine, and as he slowly began to speak, the tension in the room grew palpable. "I no longer consider someone who disrespects her own father as my daughter. I knew you moved in with me for the inheritance." My father-in-law's stern tone caught my sister-in-law off guard, leaving her visibly stunned. Adding the final blow, he declared, "You won't get a single cent of my inheritance." These words seemed to knock the wind out of my sister-in-law. Her husband, who had been supporting her staunchly, suddenly looked defeated. They both slumped their shoulders and left. The rent for my father-in-law's house was a hefty sum far beyond what my sister-in-law and her husband could afford. Inevitably, they had to move out. I had no idea that my parents-in-law's house was rented, and neither did my husband. He later confirmed it with his father. After moving out, my sister-in-law, who had been careless with money, suddenly found herself in a financial crisis. Their habit of splurging continued, and they started relying heavily on credit cards, which only led to mounting debt. I heard they moved in with her husband's parents, but I don't know much about what happened after that. On the other hand, things have been smooth for us since we started living with my father-in-law. His broken hand healed well, and his legs and hips grew stronger to the point where he could manage everything on his own. He's now so energetic that he even goes jogging with my daughter. He's like a different person from when we first moved in. Since this incident, my father-in-law has been discussing various things with my husband and has started planning for the future, including drafting a will. I'm not sure what's in the will, but I assumed he's arranged things so that his daughter won't inherit anything. What made me happiest was when my father-in-law paid off the remaining balance of our home loan. We still had nearly 20 years of payments left, but I'm grateful that he paid it off ahead of schedule. With the loan fully paid, my father-in-law is now considering renovations to make our home more accessible. He talks about his plans with a smile, but I don't want him to talk about becoming bedridden anytime soon. I want him to stay healthy for as long as possible.
Let me tell you a bit about us. My name's Eleanor, and I've been married to Thomas for many years. We've got 2 kids, Ava, our oldest, and James, the youngest. Living with us, you'd see right away how different the air is between them. I was a stay-at-home mom, see, 'cause Thomas did all right by us, made enough so I could focus on the kids. Mom, where's my blue notebook? I swear I left it right here. Ava would shout down from her room, always losing things, but managing to keep her life more organized than a planner. Check under your bed. I'd yell back, knowing her room like the back of my hand. Ava, she was sharp as a tack, went off to college on a scholarship and never looked back. Didn't cost us a dime for her schooling. Now James, that boy was another story. Thomas, God bless him, loved that boy a bit too much. Favored him, you know? Always in his corner, even when he messed up, which was more often than not. James, you need to take life a bit more seriously, I remember telling him one evening at dinner. He just rolled his eyes, fork halfway to his mouth. Come on, Eleanor, the boy will find his way. He's young. Let him have some fun. Thomas chimed in, always the peacemaker. Mom, Dad's right. I'm just trying to figure things out, James would say, trying to sound calm, but I could hear the irritation there, clear as day. He was good at making you feel like you were the one seeing things wrong. Ava was different. When she moved out, got her job, and started her life, she never asked for a penny. Proud of her, I was. I made sure to budget, Mom. I don't want to be a bother. She'd tell me over the phone, and my heart would swell with pride. Meanwhile, James seemed to think our pockets were as deep as the ocean. Hey, can I get some cash? Going out with the guys, he'd drop casually, like he was talking about the weather. It's not a bank, James. What happened to the job hunt? I'd press, trying not to let the frustration bleed through. Jobs suck, Mom. I'm still looking for the right fit, he'd grumble, always with an excuse. Thomas and I would go back and forth about it. He's just lost, Eleanor. He'll settle down, he'd assure me, but the worry lines etched deeper with each passing day. I'd sit there, coffee in hand, morning light streaming through the window, wondering where we went wrong. Was it too much love? Not enough tough love? James had set his sights on a prestigious college right out of high school, a place in a neighboring city known for its academic rigor. The fact that the college was expensive seemed to bother him less than it should. Thomas and I were roped into paying not just for his tuition, but also for a rented apartment where he could stay while attending classes. It was a big financial strain, but Thomas believed it was all worth it for our son's future. My studies are going great, James would assure us over the phone, his voice always upbeat. You guys don't need to worry about a thing, he'd add, and Thomas would nod, satisfied, passing on the latest cheerful update. But as months turned into a year and then another, the details were sparse. We got snippets of his life, a mention of a test here, a group project there, but never anything concrete. No grades, no reports, nothing that actually showed how he was doing. It started off like any other Tuesday. I was busy with the laundry, thinking about what to make for dinner, when something nagged at me, a mother's intuition, you might call it. James had been at the university for 2 years now, but we hardly got any updates. No report cards, no calls from professors, nothing. Just monthly calls asking for money. Thomas, don't you think it's odd? We never see any grades from James, I mentioned one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner. Thomas, always the optimist, just shrugged it off. He's probably just busy, Ellie. You know how college can be. The next morning, I drove down to the university. It was a nice place, all ivy-covered buildings, and young folks looking like they had their whole lives sorted out. I headed straight for the dean's office to get the lowdown on how James was doing. Hi, I'm Eleanor, James Carter's mother. I'd like to hear about how he's doing, I said to the lady at the front desk. She typed something into her computer, frowned, and then typed some more. I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter, but it appears there's been a mistake. According to our records, James hasn't been enrolled here for the past 7 months. I felt like the floor dropped away from beneath me. What do you mean? Can you check again, please? She showed me the screen, and there it was in plain black and white. James had dropped out, just like that. My heart was pounding as I thanked her and walked out, my mind racing all the way to James's apartment. When I got there, the place was a mess. Looked like the aftermath of a tornado. Beer cans, pizza boxes, clothes all over the place. And there, on the couch, was James, sleeping like a baby in the middle of the day. James! I shouted, louder than I intended. He jolted awake, all bleary-eyed and confused. Mom? What are you doing here? He mumbled, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. I went to your college today. They told me you dropped out. Why didn't you tell us, James? He looked away, then back at me. I was gonna, I swear. Just, things got out of hand, and... Out of hand? James, we've been sending you money every month. Your father works hard for that money. And here you are, throwing parties and lying to us? He tried to say something, then stopped. His eyes couldn't meet mine. I'm sorry, Mom. I messed up. I left his apartment with my heart heavy and my mind in turmoil. That night, I told Thomas everything. He was upset, more than I'd seen him in years, but he didn't want to give up on James. We'll get him back on track, he said, always believing there was a way to fix things. 5 long years rolled by just like that, filled with the same old song and dance. Ava, my daughter, she's the type to grab life by the horns. Worked her fingers to the bone, climbed that career ladder fast and never looked back. Saved every penny she could with her fiancé, Mike, and when it came time for them to tie the knot, they did it all on their own. It was a beautiful, modest ceremony, just like Ava. No fuss, all class. Then there's James. Still out there, floating like a leaf in the wind, looking for himself, as Thomas likes to say. He hopped from one job to another, all thanks to Thomas's buddies giving him chances he never quite caught hold of. After Ava's wedding, which James attended with a bored look plastered across his face most of the time, he dropped a bombshell on us. He was getting married too, and oh, you should have seen the girl he brought home. Lisa, her name was, and she was as sharp as a marble. Selfish? Sure. But James was smitten, or so he claimed. I wasn't too keen on her, to be honest. James, are you sure about this one? I asked him one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner. Mom, Lisa's great, you just gotta get to know her better, he shot back, all defensive like I was attacking him. And just like that, they planned a wedding that could have been mistaken for a royal affair. Of course, they expected Thomas to foot the bill, which he did without even batting an eye. Thomas, can we talk? I cornered him one evening after the plans were underway. What's on your mind, Ellie? He asked, though I could tell he already knew. It's this wedding, Thomas. And everything else we keep paying for James. When is enough, enough? I was nearly at my wit's end. He's our son, Ellie. We can't just cut him off, Thomas sighed, running his hands through his hair. I know he's our son, but look at Ava. She never asked for a dime. Worked for everything she has. Doesn't that tell you something? I could feel my voice rising, frustration boiling over. Eleanor, we'd been over this. James is different. He needs more help, he said, his tone final, leaving no room for arguments. And so, the wedding happened. It was as grand as they come, leaving Thomas and me with a lighter wallet and me with a heavier heart. No sooner had the wedding bell stopped ringing than James was asking for more, this time an apartment and a monthly allowance to boot. Can you believe that? After all we've done already? I vented to Thomas one night. He's trying to start a new life with Lisa. They need our support, Thomas tried to justify, always the peacemaker. Support, Thomas? It's like we're funding a never-ending party for him, I snapped, unable to hold back my dismay. Despite my protests, Thomas went ahead and bought them an apartment. The monthly check started flowing soon after. Every time I signed one of those checks, a part of me wilted. I loved my son, God knows I do, but this was getting to be too much. Ava managed. Why can't he? I muttered under my breath every time I sealed an envelope. Life trudged on like this, me simmering with every check, every call for more money. Thomas and I had more than a few rounds about it. He'll settle down, Ellie, just you wait and see, he'd always say. But me? I wasn't too sure anymore. Something had to give, and I was beginning to worry it might be us. The day Thomas died was the day part of me died too. He was gone, just like that, a heart attack right in the middle of his workday. Nobody saw it coming. It hit me like a freight train, one minute he was there, the next, just a memory. I was shattered, barely holding the pieces together. Ava was my rock through it all. She took charge the way she always does, organizing the funeral, handling the calls, managing everything so I could just breathe. Or at least try to. I couldn't have gotten through those days without her. James? Well, he was another story. Showed up to his father's funeral looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Stood there with a face like he was waiting for a bus, not a tear in sight. And Lisa was right there beside him in a black dress that was anything but appropriate, eyes glued to her phone like it was just another day. The funeral was a blur, but I remember the weight of their stares, the whispers. It wasn't right. When everyone had left, the air thick with condolences and the scent of lilies, that's when James decided to stir up more trouble. Mom, we need to talk about Dad's property. I'm the heir. He always said so, James declared, his voice too loud for the somber mood of the house. I felt a rush of anger so fierce it nearly choked me. James, this is neither the time nor the place, I snapped, my voice cracking under the strain. Lisa piped up then, her tone sharp, well, it's not just about the money. We're thinking about moving in here. Take charge, you know? Before I knew it, she was walking around the living room, touching this, moving that, as if she owned the place already. Some of these old things will have to go, of course. I stood there, stunned, watching her parade around my home. Over my dead body, you will. This is my house. I finally burst out. Lisa laughed, a nasty, grating sound. Well, that's only temporary, isn't it? The room spun a little at her words. Ava stepped in then, her voice calm but firm. Let's all take a step back. We can sit down in a few days and discuss everything like adults. But James wouldn't have it. No, we need to sort this now. Dad would have wanted me to have it sorted quickly. Ava looked at me, her eyes full of worry, and I knew she was in this fight with me. But standing there, in the echo of my husband's last footsteps through our home, my energy was fading fast. Fine. We'll talk about it now if we must, I said, the room going quiet. I've decided I'm moving into a nursing home. Thomas and I had it picked out long ago. James whipped out his phone and pulled up the website of the nursing home. After scrolling for a bit, he looked up, shaking his head. This place is a money pit, Mom. You're not wasting your savings living there. You'll live with us in this house. His wife made a face like she'd just bitten into a lemon, but then smoothed it over with a phony smile. Of course, you can stay with us. I mean, you'll help around with cooking and cleaning, right? The words stung, but before I could react, Ava leaned in close and whispered something in my ear. Her words were a quiet bombshell, one I couldn't believe at first. But she was serious, her eyes telling me to just trust her. Taking a deep breath, I straightened up and addressed them all. Actually, I won't be needing any inheritance. Ava and I have made our plans. I'll stay with her for now. Ava nodded, adding firmly, and I don't want any part of the inheritance either. We'll go to the notary tomorrow to make it official. James and Lisa exchanged a quick, greedy glance before breaking into wide grins. Well, if that's what you want, Mom, James said, barely concealing his delight. Lisa practically skipped to the kitchen to pop open a bottle of champagne. While they were celebrating in the next room, I slipped away to pack my things, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. Ava was right beside me, helping to fold clothes and pack up my life in quiet solidarity. The next morning, Ava and I went to the notary. James and Lisa were already there, looking smug. We signed all the necessary papers. James could barely contain his glee, thinking he had won the lottery. Back at Ava's place, her husband, Mike, had prepared a warm welcome. The table was set with a good lunch and tea, making me feel cherished and safe. Mike gave me a comforting hug. Glad to have you here, he said, his smile genuine and warm. Living with Ava and Mike had been a balm to my worn spirit. Day by day, I found pieces of myself that had been lost in the chaos of grief and family drama. Ava was ever the caretaker, making sure I was comfortable, offering a listening ear, and just being there, something I hadn't realized I'd been missing so much. It was on a sunny Thursday morning, while I was enjoying a cup of coffee in the garden, that my phone rang. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen, and I hesitated before answering. Hello, Eleanor? This is Janet from Pine Grove Care Home. The voice was warm and professional. I'm calling to inform you that your place here is ready for you. I furrowed my brow, confusion washing over me. I think there's been a mistake. I didn't book a place at any care home. Oh, no mistake, ma'am. Your husband, Thomas, arranged for 2 lifetime places here in your name. Since his place is now vacated, you also have an option to receive a refund. The amount would be $200,000. My hand trembled as I held the phone, tears welling up in my eyes. Thomas had always been thoughtful, but this? This was beyond anything I could have imagined. Thank you, I managed to choke out, overwhelmed by his love even in his absence. I hung up and stared out at the garden, the flowers blooming with no care of the world's troubles, a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. Ava noticed my tears when she came out to join me. Mom, what's wrong? Who was that on the phone? She asked, her voice laced with concern. I wiped my eyes, looking up at her. That was the nursing home. Your father, he had made arrangements for us before he died. There's enough money for me to decide what I want to do without worrying. Ava sat down next to me, taking my hand in hers. That's amazing, Mom. But you know you don't have to go if you don't want to. You can stay here with us. We want you here. I squeezed her hand, grateful for her and Mike's generosity. I know, darling. And I appreciate it more than words can say. But your father chose that place with care, thinking of our health and future. They have excellent medical facilities, and honestly, it might be the best place for me to be. I think he'd want me to use it. We spent the rest of the day looking into what Pine Grove had to offer. It was one of the best in the state, with top-notch care, beautiful grounds, and plenty of activities. It wasn't just a nursing home, it was a community where I could thrive, not just survive. Looks like Dad really was thinking ahead, Ava remarked as we browsed through the photos of the facility online. He always did, didn't he? Always making sure we were okay. I replied, a small smile creeping through the tears. We decided to visit Pine Grove the following week, to see everything in person and make the arrangements if everything felt right. As we planned, I felt a strange peace settling over me, the kind that had been elusive since Thomas passed. It was a crisp morning, and the air in Ava's house was filled with a mix of cardboard and anticipation as we packed my belongings. That's when the peace was shattered by James and Lisa barging in, papers in hand and fury in their eyes. "Mom, you've got to listen, this is serious." James was red-faced, waving documents like they were flags. I motioned for him to calm down. "James, take a breath and explain what's going on," I said, trying to keep the room from spinning into chaos. "It's Dad's loans, Mom. He took out loans for my wedding, the apartment, all secured against the house. And now, the bank wants their money." His voice was shrill, the panic clear in his eyes. Lisa chimed in, her voice shrill. "There's no money left, Eleanor. You and Ava played us. Now they want to take everything." I couldn't help but smile, not out of amusement, but because of the absurdity of it all. "Your father was a wise man, James. He invested in a nursing home for our future. Everything is in my name. As for the house, well, that's your inheritance now." James's face went from red to white. "You need to give up that nursing spot, give us the money. We need it to cover these debts." Lisa was nearly hysterical. "I took out loans for my surgery to look good for James. You owe us that money to help." Ava stood beside me, her demeanor calm but firm. "The debts aren't Mom's concern, James. She signed over the house to you. That was your choice." I looked at both of them, my voice steady. "I think you should consider selling the apartment you got as a gift. It could cover your debts." "No. We plan to rent it out, make some income." James spat back, his desperation palpable. I shrugged, feeling a weight lift as I finally let go of the burden. "Well, that's your decision, James. But as for me, I'm done. The house, the debts, you wanted the inheritance, it's all yours now." James looked like he was about to explode, and Lisa was no better, screeching about her financial woes until Mike stepped in, his voice thunderous. "Enough. You can't come here and threaten my family. Get out." Mike's presence was enough to push James and Lisa out the door, their threats and shouts fading as they left. Ava closed the door behind them, her hand resting on the knob for a moment as if to seal away the chaos. I let out a long breath, feeling the final ties of obligation fall away. Ava looked at me, a mixture of concern and relief in her eyes. "Are you okay, Mom?" "I am, darling. More than okay," I assured her, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I'm free of the house and the debts. Free of the constant demands. Your father's foresight gave me this freedom, and I'm going to enjoy it without guilt." We spent the rest of the day wrapping up my belongings, each item a memory, each box a step toward my new life. As I packed, I thought about Thomas, his last gift to me, freedom and peace. I was ready for the nursing home, ready for a community of my peers, ready to embrace whatever came next without the shadow of James's problems looming over me. Settling into the nursing home was like starting a new chapter of my life, one I never knew I needed. My apartment here at Pine Grove is more beautiful than I could have imagined. From my window, I can see the sprawling gardens, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, their leaves whispering secrets I'm now free to discover. It's funny, really, how life turns out. Just a few months ago, I was tangled up in family drama, worried sick about debts and inheritances. Now, I'm here, in this peaceful haven, hearing about the outside world as if it's a distant memory. One sunny afternoon, Ava came by for our usual walk in the park that borders the nursing home. These walks have become the highlight of my week. "So, how are things back home? How's Mike?" I asked as we strolled along the paved path, admiring the blooming flowers. "Mike's great, Mom. He's really been a rock through all this. And we've got some news. I'm pregnant." Ava beamed, her face glowing with joy. My heart swelled with happiness. "Oh, Ava, that's wonderful. I'm going to be a grandma." I hugged her, feeling an excitement I hadn't felt in ages. As we walked, we talked about her plans, about how she wanted to raise her child, and the laughter we'd share. It was a beautiful feeling, looking forward to life again. And what about James? Heard from him lately? I ventured gently, knowing that part of my heart was still tender where he was concerned. Ava sighed. Yeah, I heard from a mutual friend. He and Lisa sold the apartment and the house to cover their debts. After everything was paid off, Lisa left him. Now he's living in a small rental and had to finally get a job. Sounds like he's learning some hard lessons, I said, not without a pinch of sadness for the son I once held in my arms, thinking the world was his oyster. It's probably for the best, Mom. He's taking responsibility for himself now. It's what you always hoped for, right? Ava squeezed my hand as we paused to watch a pair of ducks glide across the pond. That's true, darling. I always did want him to stand on his own 2 feet. Maybe now he'll find his way, I replied, feeling a mix of relief and resignation. It was hard not to worry, but at least he was making his own path now. Ava changed the topic then, talking about the nursery she was planning, the colors and themes swirling in her creative mind. We laughed and planned, and for a while, I forgot all about the troubles of the past. Living in Pine Grove, I found a community that feels like family. We share stories, play games, and support each other. The staff here are wonderful, always making sure we're comfortable and cared for. It's more than I could have hoped for, and sometimes, I catch myself wishing Thomas could see me now, happy, at peace, and about to be a grandmother. My name is Kelly, and I married Tom when I was young and full of dreams. We'd been high school sweethearts, and I thought we'd be happy forever. My father, a successful businessman who owned a furniture factory, gave us a beautiful house as a wedding gift. 3 years after the wedding, our son Michael was born. As the years passed, I threw myself into being the perfect housewife and mother. I kept our home spotless, cooked gourmet meals, and made sure Michael had everything he needed. Tom's career as a sales manager wasn't progressing as quickly as he'd hoped. One night, he came home frustrated and angry. "Damn it, Kelly. I can't take this anymore. I'm busting my ass at work, and for what? Pennies." He slammed his fist on the kitchen table, making me jump. "What do you want me to do about it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Tom's eyes lit up. "Your father. He could give me a job at his factory. A senior position. You could talk to him, couldn't you?" I hesitated. My father had always been fair in his business dealings, and I didn't want to take advantage of our relationship. But seeing the desperation in Tom's eyes, I nodded. "Okay, I'll talk to him." The next day, I visited my father at his office. "Dad, I need to ask you something," I began nervously. "It's about Tom. He's not happy with his job, and I was wondering if you might have a position for him here at the factory?" After a long moment, my father nodded. "All right, I'll give him a shot. But he'll have to prove himself like anyone else." When I told Tom the news, he was ecstatic. He picked me up and spun me around the kitchen. "You're amazing, Kelly. This is going to change everything for us." And for a while, it did. Tom started earning more money, and our financial worries eased. But as one problem faded, another grew in its place, my relationship with Tom's mother, Helen. Helen was a force of nature, fiercely protective of her only son and openly disapproving of me. She'd drop by unannounced, criticize my housekeeping, and demand my constant attention. One afternoon, as I was trying to get dinner ready, Helen burst through the front door. "Kelly, I need you to take me shopping right now." I gritted my teeth. "Helen, I'm in the middle of cooking. Can it wait until tomorrow?" Her eyes narrowed. "Are you saying my needs aren't important? After all I've done for this family?" I bit back a retort, knowing it would only make things worse. "Of course not. Just give me a few minutes to finish up here." As I drove Helen to the mall, listening to her complaints about my driving, my cooking, and pretty much everything else, I couldn't help but wonder how my life had become this way. I was an intelligent, capable woman, yet here I was, catering to everyone else's whims while my own dreams gathered dust. One particularly frustrating afternoon, Helen barged into our home unannounced, as usual. "Kelly," she called out, her voice grating on my already frayed nerves. "I'm hungry. Make me something to eat." Biting my tongue, I set aside the laundry and trudged to the kitchen. As I prepared a meal for Helen, she sat at the kitchen table, criticizing my every move. "You're using too much oil," she snapped. "And for heaven's sake, cut those vegetables smaller. Don't you know how to cook properly?" As I placed the finished meal in front of her, I hoped she'd eat quickly and leave. But to my dismay, she packed up all the food I'd prepared and stood up. "I'll be taking this with me," she announced. "I have bridge club tonight, and this will do nicely for snacks." I stared at her in disbelief. "But Helen, that was supposed to be our dinner." "Oh, you can always make more," she said, already heading for the door. "It's not like you have anything better to do with your time." As the door slammed behind her, I sank into a chair, feeling defeated. I glanced at the clock, realizing I now had less than an hour to prepare another meal before Tom got home from work. When Tom arrived, he found me frantically trying to get dinner on the table. "What's going on?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Why isn't dinner ready?" I explained what had happened with his mother, hoping for some understanding or support. Instead, Tom's face darkened. "Mom was here, and you didn't make her feel welcome?" he demanded. "Kelly, you know how important family is to me. You should have been more accommodating." "Accommodating?" I echoed, incredulous. "Tom, she took our dinner. She treats me like a servant in my own home." Tom shook his head, clearly annoyed. "You're exaggerating. Mom just wants to feel loved and appreciated." "Is that too much to ask?" As we ate the hastily prepared meal in silence, I couldn't help but feel a growing distance between us. Tom, once my high school sweetheart and closest confidant, now felt like a stranger across the dinner table. One evening, Tom came home from work in a foul mood. His face was red with anger as he slammed the front door behind him. "Kelly," he bellowed. "Your father is a tyrant, a despot. He humiliates people and uses them like pawns in his little game." I was taken aback. My father had always been fair and kind in my experience. "What happened?" I asked cautiously. Tom's eyes flashed with fury. "I stood up for an employee today. Your father was treating him unfairly, and I couldn't stand by and watch. And you know what your precious daddy did? He fired me on the spot." My mind reeled. This didn't sound like my father at all. "There must be some mistake," I said. "Let me talk to Dad and hear his side." "No," Tom roared, causing me to flinch. "You will not speak to your father. You will not speak to your mother. As far as we're concerned, they no longer exist for us. Do you understand?" Trembling, I nodded, too shocked and scared to argue further. In the days that followed, Tom found another job. He started earning well again, but the incident had changed something fundamental in our relationship. The warmth and love I once felt for him was replaced by fear and resentment. Years passed, and our son Michael grew up. He often asked about his grandparents, but Tom would shut down any conversation about them. "You have one grandmother," he would say firmly. "My mother. That's all you need to know." As Michael prepared to leave for college in another city, I felt a mix of pride and sadness. My baby was growing up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing the only ally I had in this house. Over the next few years, my life fell into a monotonous routine. I catered to Tom's every whim and endured Helen's constant criticism. Without Michael as a buffer, their treatment of me grew even more oppressive. One afternoon, as I was scrubbing the kitchen floor under Helen's watchful eye, the phone rang. I reached for it, but Helen snatched it away. "I'll answer it," she snapped. "You focus on getting that floor clean. I can still see spots." I gritted my teeth and returned to my task, but I couldn't help overhearing Helen's side of the conversation. Yes, this is the residence of Kelly. Who? Her father? Helen's voice dripped with disdain. I'm sorry, but Kelly isn't available to speak with you. Please don't call again. My head snapped up. Wait. I called out, but Helen had already hung up the phone. That was your father, she said coldly. I told him not to contact you again. You should be thanking me for protecting this family from those toxic people. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. You had no right to do that, I said, my voice shaking. He's my father. I should have been allowed to speak to him. Helen's eyes narrowed. You ungrateful little. Just then, Tom walked in. What's going on here? He demanded. Helen immediately put on a hurt expression. Oh, Tom, your wife is being so disrespectful to me. After all I do for this family. Tom turned to me, his face dark with anger. Is this true, Kelly? Are you disrespecting my mother? I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. I realized with a sinking heart that it didn't matter what I said. Tom would always take Helen's side. A year passed since that fateful phone call from my father. Life continued its suffocating routine, with Tom and Helen's control over me growing tighter by the day. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, everything changed. The phone rang while I was preparing breakfast. Tom was in the shower, and Helen hadn't arrived for her daily inspection of my housekeeping. For once, I was able to answer without interference. Hello? I said tentatively. Kelly? Is that you? The voice on the other end was familiar, yet distant, my father's voice. Kelly, it's your mother. She's very ill. The doctors, they don't think she has much time left. She needs you. We both do. Just then, I heard the bathroom door open. Tom would be down any minute. I'll try, Dad. I promise I'll try, I whispered before quickly hanging up. When Tom entered the kitchen, I was fighting to compose myself. Who was that on the phone? He asked suspiciously. I took a deep breath. It was my father. My mother is very ill, Tom. She's dying. I need to go see her. Tom's face hardened. Absolutely not. We've been through this, Kelly. Your parents don't exist for us anymore. I felt something snap inside me. For the first time in years, I stood up to him. I'm going, Tom. With or without your permission. She's my mother, and I won't let her die without saying goodbye. Tom's jaw clenched. Fine. One day. That's all you get. And then you come back home where you belong. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. One day was better than nothing. With shaking hands, I called my son Michael and told him what was happening. To my surprise and relief, he immediately offered to accompany me. The next morning, Michael and I set off for my childhood home. When we arrived, my father met us at the door. He looked older than I remembered, grief etching deep lines in his face. Without a word, he pulled me into a tight embrace. He led us to my mother's room. She lay in bed, pale and frail, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. Kelly, she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. My baby girl. I rushed to her side, clasping her hand in mine. Mom, I'm here. I'm so sorry. Can you ever forgive me? She smiled weakly. There's nothing to forgive, sweetheart. I'm just glad you're here now. We spent the day by her bedside, sharing memories and making up for lost time. As the sun began to set, my mother's breathing became labored. She squeezed my hand and looked into my eyes. Kelly, she said softly. Promise me you'll live your life. Really live it. Don't let anyone cage your spirit again. Tears streamed down my face as I nodded. I promise, Mom. I promise. She smiled one last time, then closed her eyes. Her hand went limp in mine. She was gone. Suddenly, my phone began to ring incessantly. I knew without looking that it was Tom. I answered the call, moving to the hallway for privacy. Tom's voice, sharp with anger, cut through the line. Where the hell are you, Kelly? You were supposed to be back hours ago. Tom, I can't leave yet, I stammered, my voice thick with emotion. My mother just passed away. I need to stay for the funeral. Absolutely not, he roared. I told you one day, and that's all you get. If you're not back by tomorrow, don't bother coming back at all. His words hung in the air, a threat and a promise all at once. For a moment, I was tempted to give in, to rush back to the life I knew. But then I remembered my mother's last words, urging me to live my life fully. Fine, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm staying. I ended the call before he could respond, my heart pounding. I had just defied Tom for the first time in our married life, and it was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next few days passed in a blur of grief and preparations. On the day of the funeral, as we stood solemnly around my mother's grave, my phone began to ring again. Tom's number flashed on the screen. Without thinking, I pressed the speaker button, if only to quickly silence it. Tom's voice, loud and angry, burst forth for all to hear. Kelly, this is your last chance, he yelled. If you don't come home right now, I swear I'll come and drag you back myself. You ungrateful filth, after everything I've done for you. I quickly ended the call, my face burning with shame and anger. The mourners around us looked shocked, and Michael's face was a mask of fury. My father looked more concerned than anything else. He pulled me aside as soon as the service was over. Kelly, he said gently, we need to talk. We walked to a quiet corner of the cemetery, and my father took a deep breath. Sweetheart, there's something you need to know about Tom. Something I should have told you years ago. I listened in stunned silence as my father revealed the truth about why Tom had really left the company all those years ago. It wasn't because he had stood up for an employee. It was because my father had caught him stealing money from the company and clients, manipulating prices, and pocketing the difference. I fired him to protect the company and our clients, my father explained. I didn't tell you because I thought you loved him, and I didn't want to come between you. But now, hearing how he speaks to you, seeing what your life has become, I can't stay silent anymore. I felt as if the ground had opened up beneath my feet. All these years, I had believed Tom's lies, allowed him to cut me off from my family, endured his and Helen's emotional abuse. And it had all been based on a lie. There's more, my father continued, his voice grave. I recently heard from a friend that Tom's company is under investigation. There are discrepancies, Kelly. I think he might be up to his old tricks again. As the full impact of his words hit me, I felt a strange mix of despair and liberation. The life I had known was crumbling around me, but from its ashes, I saw a chance for a new beginning. The day after the funeral, my father, Michael, and I decided to return to my house. To our surprise, we found the house bustling with activity. Helen's friends were milling about, and the smell of food wafted from the open windows. We walked in to find a full-blown party in progress. Helen, holding a glass of wine, spotted us first. Her eyes narrowed as she took in my father and Michael. Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You're late, Kelly. My birthday celebration started hours ago. I was momentarily stunned. In all the turmoil of the past few days, I had completely forgotten about Helen's birthday. Before I could respond, she thrust a dirty rag into my hands. Don't just stand there, she snapped. Start cleaning up. These tables won't wipe themselves. My father, who had been silently observing, suddenly erupted. How dare you speak to my daughter that way, he thundered, causing the room to fall silent. She's not a dog to follow your commands. She's a grown woman who deserves respect. Helen laughed derisively. Respect? She gave up any right to respect when she married my son. Her family is Tom and me now. You're nothing to her anymore. I watched in disbelief as my father and Helen argued, their voices rising. The party guests looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to leave or stay. Suddenly, Tom burst into the room. What the hell is going on here? He demanded, his eyes locking onto me. Kelly, why aren't you serving the guests? And what are they doing here? He gestured angrily towards my father and Michael. Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and anger came pouring out. No, Tom, I said, my voice steady and clear. I'm not serving anyone. I'm not cleaning up. And I'm not staying silent anymore. The room had gone deathly quiet. Even Helen seemed at a loss for words. I know the truth, Tom, I continued, pulling out the divorce papers I had hastily prepared. I know why you really left my father's company. And I'm done. I want a divorce. For a moment, Tom looked like he might lunge at me. But then, perhaps realizing he was outnumbered, he deflated. Fine, he snarled. Take your divorce. But don't think you'll get a penny from me. I couldn't help but laugh. This house is mine, Tom. My father gave it to us as a wedding gift, remember? You're the one who needs to leave. Tom and Helen left shortly after, shooting venomous glares our way. As the door closed behind them, I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. Michael, who had been quietly observing everything, finally spoke up. Mom, why didn't you tell me things were so bad? I'm sorry, Michael, I said. I thought I was protecting you. But I realize now that I was just teaching you the wrong lessons about love and respect. In the weeks that followed, my life transformed dramatically. The divorce proceedings began, and I threw myself into rebuilding my life. My father, true to his word, stood by me every step of the way. One afternoon, as we sat in his study discussing the future, my father broached a subject I hadn't expected. Kelly, he began, his voice gentle but serious, I've been thinking. I'm not getting any younger, and the factory needs new blood. How would you feel about coming to work with me? I blinked in surprise. Me? But Dad, I don't know anything about running a business. He chuckled. Neither did I when I started. You're smart, Kelly. You can learn. Besides, it's about time you had a chance to spread your wings. Over the next few months, I immersed myself in learning the business. My father was a patient teacher, guiding me through the intricacies of running a furniture factory. I discovered a passion for design and innovation that I never knew I had. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings dragged on. Tom, true to form, fought me every step of the way. He contested the ownership of the house, and even attempted to turn Michael against me. In the end, justice prevailed. I was awarded the house and substantial financial compensation for years of emotional abuse. Tom, facing charges for his fraudulent activities, found himself deep in debt and unable to hold senior positions anymore. As for Helen, she faded into the background, her influence over my life finally broken. The last I heard, she had moved in with a distant relative, her social circle diminished after the truth about Tom came out. 3 years passed in what felt like a blink of an eye. Then, one sunny morning, my father called me into his office. His face was solemn as he gestured for me to sit. Kelly, he said, his voice heavy with emotion, I'm not well. The doctors, they don't think I have much time left. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Dad, no, I whispered, reaching for his hand. He squeezed my fingers gently. It's okay, sweetheart. I've had a good life. And now, I can go knowing that you're strong, that you're free, that you'll be okay. Tears streamed down my face as he continued. I'm leaving everything to you, Kelly. The business, the house, all of it. You've more than proven yourself. I know you'll take good care of it all. In the weeks that followed, we spent as much time together as possible. My father's condition deteriorated rapidly, but his spirit remained strong. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy that I was now responsible for carrying forward. The news of my father's passing and my inheritance spread quickly through our small town. I was still adjusting to my new reality when an unexpected visitor arrived at my doorstep. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I heard the doorbell ring. Opening the door, I was shocked to see Tom standing there, a bouquet of flowers in his hand and an apologetic look on his face. "Kelly," he said, his voice softer than I'd heard it in years. "I'm so sorry about your father. May I come in?" Warily, I stepped aside to let him enter. We stood in the foyer, an awkward silence hanging between us. Finally, Tom spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Kelly. About us, about our life together. I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But I've changed. My mother, she passed away last month. She was the one who always came between us. Now, there's nothing stopping us from being happy together again." As I opened my mouth to respond, I heard the sound of a car pulling up in the driveway. A moment later, the front door opened, and a tall, distinguished-looking man walked in. "Kelly, darling, I'm home," he called out, then stopped short when he saw Tom. Tom looked between us, confusion and anger dawning on his face. "Who the hell is this?" he demanded. The man stepped forward, extending his hand to Tom. "I'm David, Kelly's husband. And you are?" Tom ignored the outstretched hand, his face contorting with rage. "Husband? What the hell, Kelly? You remarried? You traitor!" David's expression hardened. He stepped between Tom and me, his voice low and dangerous. "I suggest you leave now, and never speak to my wife that way again." Tom lunged forward, but David was quicker. He caught Tom by the arm and firmly escorted him to the door. "This is your only warning," David said calmly. "Stay away from Kelly. If you ever come near her or insult her again, you'll regret it." With that, he shut the door in Tom's face. As the sound of screeching tires faded away, David turned to me, his face softening with concern. "Are you okay, love?" I nodded, stepping into his embrace. "I'm fine. I'm just glad you're home." I looked up at him, a smile playing on my lips. "And I'm glad you waited for me after all these years." David chuckled, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "I've loved you since high school, Kelly. I would have waited forever if I had to." As we stood there in each other's arms, I marveled at how life had come full circle. David and I had been high school sweethearts before Tom came into the picture. After my divorce, we had reconnected, and our old feelings had blossomed anew. We'd married in a quiet ceremony 6 months ago, starting a new chapter in both our lives. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Michael. "Mom, great news. Jessica's pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother." In the months that followed, life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Michael and his wife Jessica moved back to our city, eager to be close to family as they prepared for their baby's arrival. They joined us at the factory, bringing fresh ideas and energy to the business. My name is Sarah, and I've always believed that family is the most precious thing in life. I'm married to my loving husband, Jack, and we have 2 wonderful adult children, our son, Michael, and our daughter, Emily. Michael followed in his father's footsteps and became an engineer, while Emily pursued her passion for art. I couldn't have been prouder of both of them. Emily's artistic career took off quickly after college. She organized exhibitions that drew quite a crowd, and I never missed a single one. I remember her first major show like it was yesterday. The gallery was packed, and Emily's paintings were the talk of the evening. As I walked around the gallery admiring Emily's work, I spotted her talking animatedly with a tall, handsome man. Little did I know then that this man, David, would become her husband and the father of my granddaughter. Their whirlwind romance was a joy to watch. David seemed to adore Emily, and she was happier than I'd ever seen her. They married in a beautiful ceremony just a year after they met, and soon after, Emily announced she was pregnant. I was over the moon at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. When little Sophia was born, I fell in love all over again. She had Emily's dark curls and David's green eyes, a perfect combination of both her parents. It was around this time that Emily made a decision that surprised me. She announced that she was quitting her job to work from home and raise Sophia full-time. "Are you sure about this, honey?" I asked her one afternoon as we sat in her living room, watching Sophia play with her blocks. Your career was just taking off. I'd be more than happy to help with Sophia if you want to keep working. Emily shook her head, a determined look in her eyes. I appreciate the offer, Mom, but I want to do this myself. I'm ready to sacrifice my career for Sophia. She needs me right now. I couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was off about this decision, but I respected Emily's choice. After all, she was a grown woman capable of making her own decisions. As the months passed, I noticed that Emily became more distant. Our regular coffee dates became less frequent, and when I called, she always seemed to be busy. As Emily drifted away, I found myself spending more time with Michael and his wife, Lisa. When they had their son, Tommy, Lisa asked if I could help out as a nanny. Of course, I jumped at the chance. And so, I threw myself into my role as Tommy's nanny. It was exhausting but rewarding work, and it helped fill the void left by Emily's absence. Still, I couldn't help but wonder if Emily was upset about the time I was spending with Tommy. I wanted to talk to her about it, but she kept avoiding my calls and canceling our plans. As Christmas approached, I held on to hope that Emily would reach out. I imagined us all gathered around the tree, Sophia opening presents with wide-eyed wonder. But as the days ticked by, that hope began to fade. On Christmas Eve, I sent Emily a message. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. We miss you and would love to see you tomorrow. Love, Mom. Hours passed, with no response. I tried to focus on the joy of having Michael, Lisa, and Tommy over, but Emily's absence cast a shadow over the festivities. Christmas morning came and still no word from Emily. As we sat around opening presents, I couldn't help but notice the empty spot where Emily, David, and Sophia should have been. Mom, are you okay? Michael asked, noticing my distraction. I forced a smile. Of course, dear. Just thinking about how fast you've all grown up. But inside, I was seething. This wasn't just about missing a family gathering anymore. This was about crossing a line. After the presents were opened and the dinner was cleared away, I turned to Jack. We need to go see Emily, I said firmly. This has gone on long enough. Jack knew better than to argue when I used that tone. He nodded, and we began gathering gifts for Emily, David, and Sophia. As we pulled up to their house, I noticed that the curtains were drawn, and the Christmas lights that Emily usually put up were noticeably absent. My heart sank a little more. We approached the front door, arms laden with gifts. Jack rang the doorbell, and we waited. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours before we heard movement inside. The door creaked open, and there stood Emily. My heart nearly stopped at the sight of her. She looked different. Tired, yes, but there was something more. Her eyes, usually bright and full of life, seemed dull and weary. She was wearing long sleeves, despite the warmth of the house, and she held herself as if she was in pain. Mom? Dad? What are you doing here? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Merry Christmas, sweetheart, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We missed you at the family gathering, so we thought we'd bring Christmas to you. Emily's eyes darted nervously behind her before she stepped onto the porch, partially closing the door behind her. That's really nice of you, but you shouldn't have come. I'm not feeling well, and I didn't want to get anyone sick. It was then that I noticed the bruise on her arm, partially hidden by her sleeve. My motherly instincts went into overdrive. Emily, what happened to your arm? I asked, reaching out to her. She flinched away from my touch, pulling her sleeve down. Oh, it's nothing. I had a little accident the other day. Slipped in the bathroom. Clumsy me. I exchanged a glance with Jack. We both knew she was lying. Where's Sophia? Jack asked, trying to peek inside the house. We brought her some presents. Emily's face softened at the mention of her daughter. She's napping right now. But I'm sure she'd love to see you. Maybe she could come visit you tomorrow? I nodded eagerly, grasping at this olive branch. Of course. We'd love to have her over. We chatted for a few more minutes, the conversation stilted and uncomfortable. Emily kept glancing back at the house, as if afraid someone would overhear. As we were about to leave, I couldn't help but pull Emily into a hug. She stiffened at first, but then melted into my embrace. For a moment, I felt like I was holding my little girl again. The next day, I woke up early, my mind still reeling from our visit to Emily's house. I busied myself in the kitchen, preparing Sophia's favorite foods and setting up some art supplies. Around noon, the doorbell rang. I rushed to answer it, finding Emily standing there with Sophia. My heart ached at the sight of my daughter, her eyes darting nervously as if expecting trouble. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "Sophia's excited to spend some time with you." I knelt down to Sophia's level, opening my arms. "Hello, sweetheart. Grandma's so happy to see you." Sophia hesitated for a moment before running into my embrace. I held her tightly, breathing in her sweet, familiar scent. Emily handed me Sophia's backpack. "I've packed some of her things. I'll be back to pick her up this evening, okay?" I turned my attention to my granddaughter, determined to make the most of our time together. "Come on, sweetie. Let's go see what fun things Grandma has planned." We spent the afternoon drawing, baking cookies, and playing with dolls. It was wonderful to see Sophia laugh and play, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She seemed more subdued than usual, often glancing at the door as if expecting someone to burst in. As we sat coloring together, I decided to gently probe. "Sophia, honey, is everything okay at home?" Sophia's crayon paused mid-stroke. She looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes. "Mommy cries a lot," she said quietly. My heart clenched. "Why does Mommy cry, sweetheart?" Sophia shrugged, returning to her coloring. "Daddy yells at her. He says mean things." I tried to keep my voice calm, even as anger and fear surged through me. "What kind of mean things, Sophia?" "He says Mommy is stupid and can't do anything right. Sometimes he grabs her arms really hard." Sophia demonstrated, gripping her own arm tightly. We sat like that for a while, my mind racing. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I couldn't let Emily and Sophia continue living in fear. As the afternoon wore on, Sophia's play took a disturbing turn. She began acting out scenes with her dolls, making them yell at each other and push each other around. "Sophia," I said gently, "where did you learn to play like that?" She looked up at me, her face serious. "That's how Daddy treats Mommy sometimes." After Sophia's revelations, I couldn't sit idle any longer. I called Lisa, my daughter-in-law, and asked if she could watch Sophia for a few hours. She agreed without hesitation, sensing the urgency in my voice. "Jack," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination, "we need to go to Emily's house. Now." He nodded, his face grim. "I'll drive." The ride to Emily's house was tense, filled with unspoken worries. As we pulled up to their street, I suggested we speak to the neighbors first. "Maybe they've heard something," I reasoned. "It could give us a better idea of what's really going on." We approached the house next door, and a middle-aged woman answered. Her eyes narrowed as we introduced ourselves as Emily's parents. "We're concerned about our daughter," I explained. "Have you heard any disturbances from their house? Any arguments or screaming?" The woman's face hardened. "I haven't heard a thing," she said dismissively. "They seem like a perfectly normal couple to me." Her arrogant tone set my teeth on edge, but I thanked her politely. As we walked away, Jack squeezed my hand reassuringly. We were about to knock on Emily's door when we heard it, David's voice, raised in anger. "Why did you let Sophia go to your mother's? You know, I don't like her spending time there." My blood ran cold. Jack and I exchanged a look of horror before I jabbed the doorbell, my heart pounding. The shouting abruptly stopped. Moments later, David opened the door, a pleasant smile plastered on his face. "Sarah, Jack, what a surprise. What brings you here?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. I peered past him, my eyes widening as I saw Emily struggling to her feet. Without a word, I pushed past David and rushed to my daughter's side. "Emily, sweetheart, are you all right?" I asked, checking her for visible injuries. She nodded weakly, avoiding my gaze. Anger surged through me as I turned to face David. "How dare you treat my daughter like this?" I hissed, my voice low and dangerous. "I know what's been going on here, and I won't stand for it any longer." David's facade cracked for a moment before he regained his composure. "I think you've misunderstood, Sarah. I'm simply trying to raise my wife properly. She can be quite difficult sometimes, you know." "Raise her?" I spat. "She's your wife, not your child. And there's nothing proper about abuse." David's eyes narrowed. "Why don't we ask the neighbors? They'll tell you everything's fine here." In that moment, I realized the horrifying truth: the neighbors were complicit in this abuse, turning a blind eye to Emily's suffering. "I think it's time for you to leave," David said coldly. "I need some time to cool down. We can discuss this misunderstanding later." Before I could protest, he was out the door, leaving us alone with Emily. As soon as he was gone, Emily broke down. Through her tears, she began to reveal the full extent of her ordeal. David had forced her to quit her job, isolated her from family and friends. He controlled her every move, checking her phone and taking away her car. "He told the neighbors I was a bad wife and mother," she whispered. "That he was raising me to be better." They all believed him. I became an outcast in my own neighborhood. My heart shattered as I listened to my daughter's pain. I held her tightly, vowing silently that I would do whatever it took to get her and Sophia out of this nightmare. "He's gone to get more alcohol," Emily said, fear creeping into her voice. "He'll be back soon." As we began to plan our next move, I knew we were in for a fight. But looking at my daughter's bruised but hopeful face, I knew it was a fight worth having. No matter what it took, we would free Emily from this cycle of abuse and bring her home where she belonged. I turned to Emily, my voice firm but gentle. "Sweetheart, I want you to pack your things and Sophia's. You're coming home with us." Emily's eyes widened with a mix of hope and fear. "But Mom, what about David? He'll be so angry." Jack stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "That's his problem, not yours. I'm your father, and I'll protect you. Both of you." With trembling hands, Emily began to gather their belongings. I helped her, moving quickly and efficiently, knowing time was of the essence. Within minutes, we had packed the essentials into 2 suitcases. As we left the house, I could hear murmuring voices. A group of neighbors had gathered near the gate, their eyes following us with disapproval. An elderly woman stepped forward, her face pinched with judgment. "You should be ashamed," she spat at me. "You've raised your daughter poorly. She should be grateful that her husband tolerates her and takes care of her and the child." Anger surged through me. Without a word, I gently took Emily's arm and pushed up her sleeve, revealing the dark bruises that mottled her skin. "Is this what you call taking care?" I asked, my voice ringing out in the sudden silence. "Would any of you like to be raised like this?" The neighbors' faces flushed with embarrassment, and they quickly dispersed, avoiding eye contact. We hurried to the car, Jack helping Emily with the suitcases, while I kept watch. Just as we were about to leave, I spotted a familiar figure running towards us. "David," I gasped. He was red-faced with rage as he reached the car, immediately grabbing for Emily. "What do you think you're doing?" he snarled. Before I could react, Jack was there, pushing David away from the car door. "Don't you dare touch her," he growled. "Stay away from my daughter." David's eyes darted between us, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. The situation was escalating quickly. "We need to call the police," I said, pulling out my phone with shaking hands. As I dialed, Jack ushered Emily into the car. We quickly locked the doors, our hearts pounding as David circled the vehicle like a predator. "You can't take her," he shouted, kicking the car in frustration. "She's my wife." I spoke calmly to the 911 operator, explaining the situation while keeping an eye on David's increasingly erratic behavior. Emily sat in the back seat, her face pale with fear. "It's okay, sweetheart," I reassured her. "The police are on their way. We're going to be fine." Minutes felt like hours as we waited, David's shouts growing more desperate. I could see neighbors peeking out of windows, witnessing the scene but doing nothing to intervene. Finally, we heard sirens in the distance. David's face contorted with panic, and for a moment, I thought he might try to run. But he stood his ground, a defiant look in his eyes as the police cars pulled up. The arrival of the police brought a momentary sense of relief. Officers quickly assessed the situation, examining Emily's visible injuries and taking statements from all parties involved. The tension in the air was palpable as David was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police car. "He'll be detained for a few days while we investigate," one of the officers informed us. "We'll need you to come to the station to provide a formal statement, Mrs. Thompson." Emily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Emily bravely recounted her experiences to the police, her voice growing stronger with each retelling. I stayed by her side, offering support and corroborating her story where I could. However, our hope for a quick resolution was dashed when David's lawyer presented a united front of neighbors, all claiming that Emily and David had a perfectly normal relationship. "She's always been dramatic," one neighbor testified. "David's a saint for putting up with her." Their words made my blood boil, but I reminded myself to stay calm for Emily's sake. Determined to prove Emily's innocence, we agreed to a lie detector test. I held my breath as she answered question after question, her voice steady despite the stress. When the results came back confirming her truthfulness, I felt a surge of vindication. A psychological evaluation followed, revealing the depths of Emily's trauma. "Your daughter is suffering from severe depression, likely stemming from prolonged domestic abuse," the psychologist explained to me privately. "She'll need ongoing support and therapy." Despite the mounting evidence, David remained adamant about his innocence. His latest threat to seek full custody of Sophia sent Emily into a panic. "He can't take her, Mom," she sobbed. "I can't lose my baby." That's when I knew we needed to dig deeper. I hired a private detective, hoping to uncover something in David's past that would expose his true nature. Weeks passed as the detective worked tirelessly. Emily and Sophia stayed with us, slowly beginning to heal in a safe environment. Watching my daughter rediscover her smile was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Finally, the detective called with news. "Mrs. Thompson, I found something you need to see." The information he presented was shocking. David had a history of domestic violence in another city. He'd been ordered to undergo therapy but had fled the state before completing the program. "There's more," the detective said grimly. "I've collected testimonies from other victims. The pattern is always the same: charm, control, then violence." As I leafed through the files, a mix of emotions washed over me. Anger at David for causing so much pain, relief that we finally had concrete evidence, and sadness for all the women who had suffered before Emily. "Thank you," I said to the detective, my voice thick with emotion. This changes everything." The day of the court hearing arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. I sat beside Emily, squeezing her hand reassuringly as we waited for the proceedings to begin. Our lawyer, a stern-faced woman named Ms. Henderson, arranged the stack of evidence before her. As the judge called the court to order, I could see David across the room, looking smug and confident. That confidence, however, began to waver as Ms. Henderson presented our case. "Your Honor," she began, "I'd like to present evidence of Mr. David Thompson's history of domestic abuse." One by one, she laid out the detective's findings, police reports from David's previous city, incomplete therapy records, and testimonies from past victims. David's lawyer objected vigorously, but the judge overruled him, allowing the evidence. Then came a moment that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Ms. Henderson called forward a witness, Sarah, David's ex-girlfriend from 7 years ago. Sarah's voice trembled as she recounted her experiences. He would fly into rages over the smallest things. The bruises. I had to cover them with makeup every day. Next, Ms. Henderson presented Emily's lie detector results and psychological evaluation. As you can see, Your Honor, Mrs. Emily Thompson's account has been verified by multiple professional sources. The coup de grace came in the form of voice messages David had left on Emily's phone. His threatening voice filled the courtroom. "If you ever try to leave me, I'll make sure you never see Sophia again." Just when I thought we'd presented everything, Ms. Henderson surprised us all. "Your Honor, we have one more witness. With the court's permission, I'd like to call Sophia Thompson to the stand, accompanied by her child psychologist." My heart clenched as I watched my 5-year-old granddaughter walk to the front of the courtroom, her small hand clasped in the psychologist's. Sophia's eyes were wide, but her voice was clear as she spoke. "Daddy would yell at Mommy a lot," she said. "He would push her and say mean things. It scared me." Then came the moment that left the entire courtroom in stunned silence. Sophia's psychologist presented a video to the court, a shaky, dimly lit clip that Sophia had recorded on her mother's phone one night when she'd been woken by shouting. In the video, David's enraged voice could be clearly heard, along with the sound of something shattering and Emily's frightened pleas. As the video ended, I could see tears in the judge's eyes. David sat slumped in his chair, all pretense of innocence gone. The judge's verdict came swiftly and decisively. David was sentenced to prison for domestic abuse, with mandatory counseling. Emily was granted a divorce, awarded 50% of their shared property, substantial financial compensation, and full custody of Sophia. David was barred from any contact with Sophia until she turned 18, and even then, only if she chose to see him. As the gavel fell, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Emily collapsed into my arms, sobbing, not from fear this time, but from sheer relief. "It's over, Mom," she whispered. "It's finally over." As we left the courtroom, I saw David being led away in handcuffs. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw something I never expected: regret. But it was too little, too late. As I stood in my kitchen, preparing a feast for our weekly family dinner, I couldn't help but smile. The house was filled with the cheerful noise of my grandchildren playing, the aroma of roasting chicken, and the gentle hum of conversation from the living room where Emily and Michael were catching up. It had been 6 months since the court hearing, and the change in our family was palpable. The dark cloud that had hung over us for so long had finally lifted, replaced by a warmth and joy that I had feared we might never experience again. Emily and Sophia had moved in with Jack and me after the trial. At first, I worried it might be challenging for all of us to adjust, but those fears quickly dissipated. Having them close allowed us to provide the support and love they needed to heal. Sophia, my brave little granddaughter, was making remarkable progress. The nightmares that had plagued her in the early days after leaving David had become less frequent. Now, more often than not, I would hear her giggling with her cousin Tommy as they played elaborate make-believe games. "Grandma, look!" Sophia called out, running into the kitchen with a drawing in her hand. "I made this for you." I wiped my hands on my apron and knelt down to examine her artwork. The page was filled with bright colors, a stark contrast to the dark, scribbled drawings she had produced in the months following the trial. This picture showed our family, stick figures with big smiles, standing in front of a yellow house, with a rainbow arching overhead. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "Why don't we hang it on the fridge?" As I stood up, I caught sight of Emily watching us from the doorway, a soft smile on her face. The change in her was just as remarkable as Sophia's. The haunted look in her eyes had faded, replaced by a spark of life that grew brighter each day. "Need any help, Mom?" she asked, stepping into the kitchen. "You can set the table if you'd like," I replied, gesturing to the stack of plates on the counter. As we worked side by side, I marveled at how natural it felt. These simple moments of domesticity, once taken for granted, now felt like precious gifts. Emily had started drawing again, something she hadn't done since the early days of her marriage to David. Her studio, once Jack's old office, was filled with canvases. I had watched her art evolve over the past months, mirroring her healing journey. The first pieces had been dark and chaotic, all harsh lines and somber colors. But gradually, light began to creep in. Now, her latest works were explosions of color and life. "I have some exciting news," Emily said as she laid out the silverware. "The gallery downtown wants to feature some of my new pieces in their upcoming show." "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful," I exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. "I'm so proud of you." Emily beamed, her eyes shining with a confidence I hadn't seen in years. She had recently started working part-time at a local art supply store, slowly reintegrating into the workforce. It was a small step, but an important one in reclaiming her independence. As we all gathered around the dinner table that evening, Jack, Michael, Lisa, Tommy, Emily, Sophia, and me, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. The road to this moment had been long and painful, but looking at the smiling faces of my family, I knew it had been worth every struggle. Let me take you back to the start. My name is Marcy, and I've been married to Michael for almost 20 years. We met in college, fell hard and fast, got married a few years after graduation, and had Jamie shortly after that. We were the typical suburban family. Michael worked in sales, I managed a local grocery store, and weekends were for soccer games and family barbecues. That particular November morning was supposed to be like any other. I dropped Jamie off at school. He was in his sophomore year and already talking about colleges, scholarships, the whole deal. I was heading to work, but first decided to check our bank accounts. We'd been saving for Jamie's college in a separate account, something we both promised to contribute to regularly. Michael had been a bit secretive lately, saying he was working on a big deal that would benefit all of us. I trusted him, maybe too much. So, there I was, sitting in the car outside the store before my shift, logging into our online banking. What I saw, or rather, didn't see, hit me like a ton of bricks. The balance was zero. Not low, zero. Panic set in first, then confusion. I dialed Michael immediately. "Michael, where's the money in Jamie's college fund?" My voice was more of a whisper, scared of the answer. "What? Babe, calm down. What money are you talking about?" His voice had that irritatingly calm tone that always signaled trouble. "Marcy, I haven't touched it. Maybe there's some mistake with the bank. Check again." I logged in again, hoping to see a different number. But nothing changed. "No mistake, it's all gone." "What the hell is going on?" "Look, I don't know, okay? I'll sort it out. Just go to work, and we'll talk later." He hung up before I could argue further. But I couldn't let it go. I called in sick, turned the car around, and drove straight to the bank. The manager, a nice woman named Janice who knew us personally, pulled up the records. The color drained from her face as she turned the screen toward me. There had been transfers, large ones, to various accounts over the past few years. All authorized by Michael. I stormed out of the bank, drove home, and waited for Michael. When he walked through the door, the look on his face told me he knew he was caught. "Marcy, before you say anything, save it, Michael. Years? You've been stealing from our son for years?" My voice was loud enough to shake the pictures on the walls. "Stealing? No, I was investing it. In a business, for us. It was supposed to be a surprise." "A surprise? You surprise someone with a birthday party, not by draining our son's future. How could you do this to us?" I was yelling now, each word sharp and bitter. He started to say something, but stopped when he saw the look on my face. He knew this was different, this was serious. "I need to think. I can't even look at you right now." I walked away, my mind swirling with betrayal, anger, and the terrifying question of how we were going to afford Jamie's college now. The next morning, my mind was still racing. Michael was already at the kitchen table when I walked in, his mother, Gloria, sitting beside him with a cup of coffee in her hands. The air was thick with tension, and I could tell this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. "Michael, I want every penny put back into Jamie's account today," I said, my voice steady but firm. Gloria scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, Marcy, don't be so dramatic. Michael was only trying to help the family." I turned to her, shocked by her dismissal. "Dramatic? It's our son's future we're talking about, Gloria. How can you just sit there and defend him? And besides," Gloria added, "it's about time Jamie learned to stand on his own 2 feet. Why should he rely on us to pay for his education?" I stared at them, dumbfounded. "So, you're saying our promise to our son means nothing? That we should just let him fend for himself?" Gloria shook her head. "Look at you, making a mountain out of a molehill." "I'm not going to stand here and be called hysterical for caring about our son's future," I shot back, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, Marcy, I think it's best if we just cool off. We're obviously not going to agree on this." "No, we're not," I agreed, my mind made up. "I want a divorce, Michael." The room went silent. Even Gloria stopped her tutaying. "A divorce? Over this? Marcy, you need to think about this more clearly," Michael said, his voice low. "I've never been more clear about anything. You took our son's future away, and you expect me to just accept it? No, I can't and I won't. And I want the house in return for all the money you spent. That's my final decision." Michael laughed, a cruel sound that filled the room. "You think you can just take everything? I'll fight you for the house. I'll fight you for every damn thing in that divorce court." I could feel Gloria's eyes on me, her disdain palpable. But I was beyond caring what she thought. "Fine. Fight all you want. But I'm done here. Come on, Jamie, we're leaving." I called out to my son, who had been waiting in his room, probably overhearing everything. As Jamie and I gathered our things, Gloria's voice followed us. "You're making a mistake, Marcy. You'll see. You'll come crawling back." I didn't even turn around. With every step towards the door, I felt a small piece of my old life fall away, but I also felt a strange sense of freedom. Jamie and I got into the car, and I drove us to my parents' house. We were together, and that's what mattered. A week had barely passed when Michael and his mother, Gloria, decided to storm into my parents' house like they owned the place. I was in the kitchen, helping Mom with dinner, when I heard the front door slam open. There they stood, Michael looking smug and Gloria red-faced with anger. "We've hired the best lawyers, Marcy," Michael announced as if he was declaring war. "And they're going to prove that my mother funded the purchase of our house. So, you might want to reconsider your demands, unless you want to lose everything." Gloria stepped forward, jabbing a finger in my direction. "Yeah, and you better just forget about the money Michael took. Accept the divorce and the house split 50-50, or we'll make sure you and your son end up with nothing." "Listen here, Michael," I shot back, my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside. "I was the one who made the initial payment on that house. We both know that. Your mother's claim doesn't change the truth." Gloria's face turned an even brighter shade of red. "Lies. My money bought that house, and we're going to prove it. When we're done with you, you'll be begging on the streets." Michael nodded, backing up his mother's venomous words. "It's time you face reality, Marcy. You and your son will be out of that house before you know it." My mother, who had been silent until then, finally spoke up. "You have no right to come into our home and speak to my daughter that way. Get out, now." But Gloria wasn't done. She scoffed and turned her rage towards me again. "You think you're smart, huh? Well, let me tell you something, young lady. It's not just about the house. You're going to lose everything because of your stubbornness. That was when my father stepped up, his presence towering over both Michael and Gloria. "I think you've said enough. Both of you, get out of my house now, or I'll throw you out myself." They hesitated, Michael's arrogance fading as he met my father's unwavering gaze. Gloria tugged at his arm, muttering something under her breath as they turned to leave. Once they were gone, the house fell silent except for the sound of my racing heart. My hands were shaking, and I could feel tears threatening to spill over. Later that same day, after dinner had been cleared and we were all trying to find some normalcy, Jamie spoke up. He had been quiet throughout the meal, lost in thought. "Mom, I remembered something weird," he began, looking unsure. "A couple of weeks ago, I saw Dad and Aunt Linda at the mall. They were in the jewelry store." My heart sank. Linda had been my best friend since high school. What were they doing there? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "They were picking out jewelry. Aunt Linda said it was a gift for you." Jamie's voice trailed off, his expression confused. "A gift for me?" I repeated, feeling a mix of hope and suspicion. "But he never gave me any jewelry." "Yeah, and that's what's weird." They were laughing and looked really close. "Aunt Linda even told me to keep it a surprise." Jamie frowned, clearly troubled by the memory. My mind was racing. None of this made sense. Why would Michael buy jewelry with Linda and not give it to me? And after today's confrontation, everything felt even more suspicious. "I need to get to the bottom of this," I said, more to myself than to anyone else. "I'm going to hire a private detective. I need to know what's going on." I could feel my resolve hardening. If Michael was cheating on me with my best friend, I had to know the truth. A couple of weeks later, I got a call from the detective I'd hired. His voice was grave as he asked me to come to his office to discuss his findings. My stomach churned the entire drive over. When I arrived, he handed me a thick envelope. "Mrs. Harper, I'm sorry to say, the news isn't good," he started, and from there, he laid it all out. The detective had followed Michael and Linda, taken photos, and even got receipts from their purchases, including an expensive necklace that certainly never made its way to my neck. "Your husband and Mrs. Linda have been having an affair." "I'm very sorry." The drive home was a blur. When I finally got back to my parents' house, I found Mom and Dad in the living room. I told them everything, showing them the photos and receipts. The shock on their faces mirrored the hollow feeling inside me. "Oh, Marcy, I'm so sorry," Mom said, her voice breaking as she came over to hug me. "That woman has been in our home, shared our meals. How could she?" "I can't believe Linda would do this to me," I whispered, feeling a tear roll down my cheek. "All these years, she's been lying to me, to all of us." Jamie came into the room then, hearing the last part. "Mom, are you okay? What happened?" I wiped my eyes and managed a small smile for him. "It's going to be okay, honey. We just found out something upsetting about Dad and Linda, but we'll get through this. We're together, and that's what counts." That night, as I lay in bed, the betrayal gnawed at me. Michael and Linda had deceived me, stolen from me, and broken my trust. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I would fight back, for my son and for the life I deserved. The next morning, I called Linda and invited her to chat. 2 hours later, I sat across from Linda at the small cafe where we used to meet for our girls' chats, the irony of the situation not lost on me. She seemed oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, smiling as she sipped her coffee. "So, how's Jamie doing, huh? Must be getting ready for college soon?" Linda asked, her voice light and breezy. I clenched my jaw, staring straight at her. "Actually, Jamie's not doing great. He's been robbed by his father's mistress." Her smile faltered, and she set down her cup, a flash of guilt crossing her face. "Marcy, what are you talking about?" "I know about you and Michael, Linda. I've seen the proof." I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. Her face drained of color, her eyes dropping to the table. Marcy, I can explain, she stammered, fidgeting with the new ring on her finger. I pointed at her ring sharply. That ring you're wearing? It was bought with money meant for Jamie's education. Money that Michael took from our life savings. Linda's eyes filled with tears, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know, Marcy. He told me he was getting a divorce, that you two were practically done. I scoffed, the anger and betrayal churning inside me. And you believed him? After all these years, you just took his word and didn't think to ask me? To think about Jamie? She wiped at her eyes, nodding slowly. He said he would leave you the house and everything in it. He told me he made enough money to cover it all and that he wanted to leave with dignity. That's a lie, Linda. He's left us with nothing. There's another woman, too, someone from his work. Did you know about her? The words were like venom, but they needed to be said. Linda shook her head, her face crumpling as she began to sob. No, I didn't know. I'm so sorry, Marcy. I've been so stupid. For a moment, I just watched her cry, the years of friendship battling with the raw, fresh wound of her betrayal. Then, slowly, I felt my anger start to subside, replaced by a weary sadness. Look, Linda. I don't know if we can ever go back to how things were. But I appreciate you being honest with me now. She took a deep breath, nodding as she pulled off the ring and slid it across the table. I'll give you everything back. The jewelry, the car he bought me. It's the least I can do. It won't cover everything. The money's gone, and Jamie's future is up in the air. But it's a start. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything pressing down on us. Then Linda looked up, her eyes red but resolute. Let me help, Marcy. Let's figure this out together. For what it's worth, I want to make things right. We spent the next hour talking, not about the past, but about what we could do moving forward. Linda handed me the keys to the car Michael had bought her, along with a bag containing the jewelry. I'll do whatever it takes, Marcy. I owe you that much. The morning after my heart-to-heart with Linda, my phone buzzed early. It was Linda again, sounding more urgent than ever. Marcy, you're not going to believe this. Michael's company is throwing a big bash for his promotion tonight. It's at that fancy place downtown. Everyone will be there, including all the big bosses. That evening, we arrived at the restaurant, a sleek, modern place filled with Michael's colleagues in high spirits. I spotted Michael, laughing and clinking glasses, the picture of success. Seeing him like that, so carefree, fueled my resolve. Linda nudged me. Ready? As I'll ever be. Before I could second-guess myself, I stepped forward just as Michael caught sight of me. His smile vanished, replaced by a scowl. What the hell are you doing here, Marcy? You need to leave. No. His attempt to intimidate me in front of his peers only made me stronger. Actually, I'm here to congratulate you, Michael. Mind if I borrow the spotlight for a moment? His confusion was palpable as he hesitated. His boss, Mr. Carlson, noticing the exchange, gestured for me to continue. Please, let's hear what Marcy has to say. With all eyes on me, I moved towards the front where a projector was set up for presentations. Thank you, Mr. Carlson. The murmurs began as I clicked the remote, and images flashed on screen, photos of Michael and the financial director, cozy and compromising. The crowd gasped, and whispers filled the air. Not only has Michael been unfaithful to his family, but he's also been stealing from the company. Here are the financial records to prove it. The next slides showed documents, clear as day, detailing the fraud Michael and his mistress had committed. The room erupted into chaos. Michael tried to protest, his face turning red. This is nonsense. She's just a scorned woman. But Mr. Carlson, who had been examining the documents closely, silenced him with a raise of his hand. Enough, Michael. If these documents are real, you've not only betrayed your family, but also this company. He turned to the financial director, who was now as pale as a ghost. "And you, Jessica, will need to explain a lot. Security will escort you both out until we sort this out. Consider yourselves suspended, effective immediately." Michael looked like he'd been slapped, his eyes darting around the room, finding no allies. He glanced at me, fury and disbelief in his eyes. But I wasn't done yet. "I trusted you, Michael. More than that, I loved you. We built a life together, a family. And you threw it all away. I hope it was worth it." With those final words, I walked away, Linda at my side, her hand squeezing mine in support. The last thing I heard was Mr. Carlson calling for calm as we exited the building. After Michael and his mistress were fired, they had to return all the stolen money to avoid a lawsuit, a small victory in the grand scheme, but a victory nonetheless. Now, I was bracing myself for the biggest fight yet, the divorce and the battle for our house. I sat there with my lawyer, papers neatly stacked in front of us. Michael and his lawyer were across the room, looking less confident than usual. Gloria sat right behind him, her eyes shooting daggers across the room at me. As the judge entered, everyone rose, the room steeped in formality. "Please be seated," the judge commanded, and the session began. My lawyer presented the case succinctly. "Your Honor, we have clear evidence of Mr. Harper's infidelities and misuse of the couple's joint finances. We have bank records, photographic evidence, and testimonies confirming that Mr. Harper diverted family funds to support extramarital affairs." The courtroom was silent, all eyes on us as we presented each piece of evidence. Michael's face grew paler with every document displayed. Then it was Gloria's turn. She stood, almost trembling with fury. "Your Honor, this is all lies. My son is a good man. It's Marcy who drove him to do what he did. Besides, the house they lived in was bought with my money." Her voice was shrill, desperate. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to maintain composure. "Mrs. Harper, do you have any proof of your claims about the house?" the judge asked, his tone skeptical. "Well, I don't have the papers here, but it's true," she stammered. My lawyer then stepped up, handing a stack of documents to the judge. "Your Honor, these are the bank statements and mortgage payments clearly showing that it was, in fact, Marcy who made the initial down payment and subsequent mortgage payments from her personal account." The judge nodded, examining the documents carefully. Michael whispered something to his lawyer, a look of defeat settling over him. Then, the unthinkable happened. Gloria, unable to contain herself, stood up and shouted, "This is all your fault, Marcy. If you'd been a better wife, my son wouldn't have needed other women." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. The judge banged his gavel. "Order! Mrs. Harper, one more outburst like that and I will have you removed from this courtroom." Gloria sank back into her seat, muttering under her breath. After reviewing everything, the judge finally spoke. "Having considered all the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Harper has not only been unfaithful but has also significantly mismanaged marital funds. Therefore, the court rules in favor of Mrs. Harper. The house will remain under her ownership, Mr. Harper will return 50% of the misused funds, and additional compensation for emotional distress will be awarded to Mrs. Harper." Michael looked like he had been punched in the gut, his head hanging low. Outside the courtroom, I took a deep breath of free air. It was over. The lies, the deceit, the years of hidden betrayal, finally out in the open and judged accordingly. Jamie had been there, in the courtroom, seen it all. His father's and grandmother's disgraceful behavior left an indelible mark on him. It was after the trial, on a quiet evening at home, when he came to me, his decision weighing heavily on his young shoulders. "Mom, I can't see Dad anymore. Not after everything. I don't think I want to talk to Grandma Gloria either." Jamie's voice was firm, resolute even, but I could see the pain flickering behind his eyes. I pulled him into a hug, my heart aching for him. "It's okay, Jamie. You do what you feel is right for you. I'm here, no matter what." In the weeks that followed, the idea of remaining in the house that was once a symbol of our family's unity felt more and more impossible. I made the decision to sell it, to to give Jamie and myself a true fresh start. We chose a smaller, cozier place not far from the college Jamie hoped to attend, a new beginning within reach of his future. Michael's downfall was steep and rapid. His career was shattered, his reputation in tatters. The last I heard, he was barely scraping by, relying on odd jobs and his mother's pension after the hefty sum he had to return to us. One evening, while Jamie and I were unpacking boxes in our new living room, he looked up from a book he'd just shelved. "Mom, do you ever feel bad for Dad?" His question caught me off guard, a simple query filled with complex emotions. I paused, considering my words carefully. "Jamie, I feel sad about how things turned out." "But feeling bad for him? He made his choices, honey. We all have to live with the results of what we do. What's important is that we try to do better, be better." Jamie nodded, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. "I want to be nothing like him, Mom. And you won't be. You're your own person, with your own choices to make." I ruffled his hair, proud of the young man he was becoming. Life slowly found a new rhythm, our days filled with work, school, and the occasional movie night in our snug living room. I continued my job at the grocery store, the normalcy of work a welcome anchor. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, our new home grew around us like the garden we tended together, slowly, with care, and a lot of love. Reflecting one evening over a cup of tea, I realized that despite the trials, the heartaches, and the upheaval, we had emerged stronger. I had fought for my son's future and my own peace of mind, and won. Hi, I'm Tessa. I've always been the kind to keep my head down and work hard. It's paid off. I landed a job at a major trading company right out of college and clawed my way up from there. Life was straightforward: work, sleep, and the occasional night out with friends to blow off steam. That routine changed the night I met Lucas. It was at one of those rare outings with friends, a loud party downtown where the music pounds in your chest and you have to shout to be heard. Lucas was different, more reserved, hanging back from the crowd, nursing a beer. He had that look, you know? Like he had a story to tell, but preferred to keep it to himself. We got to talking, or rather, shouting over the noise. Turns out, we both shared a distaste for these kinds of loud parties, which was kind of funny, considering where we were. Lucas was easy to talk to. He had this straightforward way about him that I appreciated right off the bat. Not really my scene, to be honest. He yelled over the music, a small smile playing on his lips. "Then why are you here?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Trying to keep my cousin happy. She dragged me out tonight," he admitted, rolling his eyes slightly. "Sounds like a good brother," I replied, nodding in approval. We ditched the party early, opting for a quieter bar down the street where we could actually hear each other. That night we talked about everything, from our jobs to our taste in movies. Lucas mentioned his previous marriage almost in passing. "It didn't work out. She wasn't faithful," he said simply, his voice flat. "But that's the past." His honesty caught me off guard, but it also made me respect him more. We started seeing each other regularly after that night. Things moved fast, and it wasn't long before we were talking about a future together. After Lucas and I decided to make things official, he was eager to introduce me to his mother, Susan. We planned a Sunday brunch at her place, and I remember feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. I wanted to make a good impression. As we pulled up to her tidy, two-story house, Lucas turned to me with a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, it'll be fine. Just be yourself," he said, squeezing my hand. The moment we stepped inside, I was hit with the smell of bacon and eggs. The house was spotless, every item in its rightful place, which told me she probably spent the better part of the morning cleaning and preparing for this. "Lucas, my boy." Susan's voice rang out from the kitchen, followed by her appearance in the doorway. She wiped her hands on her apron as she approached us. Her gaze landed on me, and it felt like she was trying to x-ray my soul. "And you must be Tessa. Heard a lot about you." "Nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Thompson," I said, extending my hand. She shook it, her grip surprisingly firm. "Call me Susan. Mrs. Thompson was my mother-in-law, and I couldn't stand her." Her blunt statement threw me off, but I laughed it off. "All right, Susan it is." We sat down at the dining table, which was meticulously set with fine china and crystal glasses, an indication of how important this meeting was to her. Susan served us, then took the seat across from me, her eyes never straying far. "So, Tessa," she started, cutting straight to the chase. "Lucas tells me you're quite the career woman." "Trading, is it? Sounds like a man's world." I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a jab. "Yes, it's trading, and it's for anyone who's good at it," I replied, keeping my tone light. Lucas chimed in, perhaps sensing the tension. "Tessa's one of the top traders at her firm. She's really good at what she does." "That so?" Susan's voice carried a note of skepticism. "I hope you know, Lucas needs someone who's present, not stuck at the office all hours." I felt my cheeks warm up, but I kept my cool. "I manage my time well. Lucas and I have plenty of quality time together." Susan hummed, poking at her food. "We'll see. I remember Lucas's ex was always busy too, until she was busy with someone else." Lucas's fork clattered against his plate. "Mom, that's enough." "Oh, relax. I'm just making conversation," Susan said, waving a dismissive hand. She then turned her attention back to me. "Tell me, Tessa, do you cook? Or should my son expect takeout every night?" "I love to cook," I said, forcing a smile. "Lucas can vouch for my lasagna." Lucas nodded vigorously. "It's true. She makes a mean lasagna." "Well, isn't that something?" Susan's tone softened a fraction. "Maybe you'll have to make it for me one of these days." The rest of the meal passed with small talk about the weather and Susan's garden, which she seemed more passionate about. Every now and then, she'd throw in a pointed question or comment, testing my responses. It was like a verbal sparring match, and I was determined not to let my guard down. As we were leaving, Susan pulled me aside. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but her words cut through the air. "Listen, Tessa. My son's happiness is everything to me. I'll do whatever it takes to protect him. Remember that." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "I have no intention of hurting Lucas. You have nothing to worry about." Susan studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll see, won't we?" After the brunch with Susan, I thought maybe things would settle down, but I was way off. Lucas's work required him to travel a lot, which meant I was home alone often. Susan saw this as her chance to really crank up her watch over me. It started with unexpected visits. The first time it happened, I was working from my home office when I heard the doorbell. I opened the door to find Susan standing there, her face set in a stern expression that didn't promise anything good. "Tessa, just in the neighborhood," she said, brushing past me into the house as if it was her own. "Thought I'd drop by." I masked my annoyance with a tight smile. "Nice to see you, Susan. What brings you here?" "Oh, just making sure everything's alright here while my son's away," she said, already wandering into the living room, eyeing everything critically. Her visits became more frequent, and each time, Susan had something to say about how I kept the house. It was like living under a microscope. One day, she walked into the kitchen while I was prepping dinner and started rifling through my pantry. "Just seeing what you feed my son when he's home. You know processed foods are no good, right?" she commented, holding up a box of pasta like it was evidence in a trial. But it didn't stop at home visits. I started noticing Susan around places I frequented, the grocery store, the gym, even the cafe near my work. It was getting creepy. One afternoon, I confronted her. She was, coincidentally, at the same grocery store as me, pushing her cart down the aisle I was in. "Susan, this is the third time this week I've run into you like this. What's going on?" She played innocent, a sly smile tugging at her lips. "What, can't a woman do her shopping?" Not at the exact same places and exact same times as her daughter-in-law, consistently. "What are you trying to do, Susan?" Her smile faded, and she leaned closer, her voice low and harsh. "I'm keeping my eyes open, Tessa. You can play the perfect wife all you want, but I know about your desire to cheat on my son." Every encounter left me more frustrated and angry. It wasn't just the invasion of my privacy, it was the constant tension, the expectation of having to defend myself against imaginary accusations. Over time, Susan's eyesight had gotten worse, something about her age and her health stacking the odds against her. The doctor had given her glasses, but she hated them. Said they made her feel old and irritated her nose. She'd put them on and take them off, fussing and fuming, and more often than not, she'd just leave them somewhere and forget. Because of that, she saw very poorly, which only added fuel to her naturally suspicious nature. With Lucas away on another one of his frequent business trips, I had grown accustomed to handling things on my own, including dealing with Susan's relentless scrutiny. One evening, feeling a bit cooped up and in need of a change of scenery, I made plans to meet my brother, Jake, for dinner. It was a casual meet-up, nothing fancy, just a chance to catch up with family and unwind. I chose a little outdoor restaurant with a nice terrace that wasn't too far from where I worked. Jake arrived first, and I spotted him at a table, waving me over with a big grin. "Hey, sis," he called out as I approached. His face was all bright and cheerful, the typical big brother ready to tease or share a joke. "Hey, Jake. It's been too long," I said, giving him a quick hug before sitting down across from him. We ordered some food and drinks, and the conversation flowed easily, as it always did with Jake. We talked about work, family, and some of the latest movies we'd both seen. It was nice, relaxing, and exactly what I needed. As the evening wore on, we wrapped things up. Outside the restaurant, we stood up to say goodbye. I gave Jake a friendly hug, just a normal sister-brother moment. When I got home later that night, the house was dark and quiet. But as I turned on the light in the living room, I nearly jumped out of my skin. There was Susan, sitting on my couch, a smug look plastered across her face, and holding what looked like a digital camera. "What the hell, Susan? What are you doing in my house at this hour?" My voice was a mix of anger and shock. She rose from the couch, holding up the camera. "Gotcha," she said, her voice dripping with a venomous triumph. "Got what, exactly?" I snapped, my patience thinning rapidly. "This." She thrust the camera in my face, showing a photo of Jake and me hugging. "Caught you red-handed with your lover." I rolled my eyes, tossing my keys on the table. "I was with my brother, Jake. We had dinner. That's it." Susan snorted, a harsh, mocking sound that made my hands clench into fists at my sides. "Sure, your brother. I know what I saw." "Oh, really? And what did you see with those failing eyes of yours?" I snapped back, my patience at its breaking point. Her face flushed with anger, and she fumbled with the camera, finally shoving it in my direction. "See for yourself." I took the camera, half expecting some blurry photo taken from a distance, but there it was, a clear shot of Jake and me, mid-hug, smiling. Just a brother and sister enjoying a nice evening out. I couldn't help but laugh, which only seemed to infuriate her more. "What's so funny?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Here, look." I handed the camera back to her. "Put on your glasses, Susan. It's just me and Jake." For a moment, she hesitated, then, muttering under her breath, she dug in her purse and pulled out her glasses. Slipping them on, she looked at the photo again. I watched her face change as she finally saw what was really there. "Now, I think it's time you left," I said firmly, my own resolve hardening. Susan looked like she wanted to argue more, but then she just nodded stiffly and headed for the door. "This isn't over," she muttered as she left. The few weeks Lucas was home felt like a dream. We were inseparable, catching up on lost time, and for a brief period, I could almost forget about the constant cloud of tension that was his mother, Susan. But like all good things, it came to an end too quickly. Soon enough, Lucas was packing his bags again for another extended business trip. I braced myself for the usual loneliness that accompanied his departures, but this time a new complication arose. Susan decided to move in. She showed up at our doorstep one afternoon, suitcase in tow, announcing her stay as if it were the most natural decision in the world. "It's for the good of the family, Tessa. I'm here to make sure you don't get into any trouble," she declared, pushing past me into the living room. I called Lucas immediately, my voice shaking with frustration. "She can't just move in here, Lucas. You need to talk to her." Lucas sighed on the other end of the line. "Tessa, please, just try to get along. I don't want to fight with her about this. It's only for a few weeks." Reluctantly, I agreed, but hanging up the phone, I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. This wasn't going to be easy. Susan wasted no time taking over the household. That first weekend, she followed me around, critiquing every little thing I did. "You're folding those towels all wrong," she'd say, or, "You missed a spot there, do it again." She even took over the kitchen, her worst idea yet. Due to her deteriorating eyesight, she constantly oversalted or overpeppered everything, but whenever the food turned out barely edible, she blamed me. "You must have distracted me," she'd snap, or, "You're trying to sabotage my cooking." During the weekdays, her behavior grew even more suffocating. She sat in the living room, a notebook in her lap, jotting down the times I left for work and came home. Any time I was delayed, even by traffic, she'd greet me with a sneer. "Late again, Busy day or busy boyfriend?" "It was traffic, Susan. Like it is for millions of people every day," I'd retort, my patience fraying at the edges. Her insinuations were relentless, and each day ended with me locking myself in the bedroom, fuming but helpless. Lucas's request echoed in my mind, keeping me from unleashing the torrent of anger I felt. A month into Susan's invasive stay at our house, I finally got the news I'd been waiting for: a promotion at work. This wasn't just any promotion. It came with the opportunity for training at our company's main branch in another city. I'd been eyeing this chance for years, a real step up in my career. When I told Lucas over the phone, his excitement for me was palpable, even through the distance. "That's incredible, babe. I'm so proud of you," he enthused. "Don't worry about the time apart. It'll fly by, and we'll be back together before you know it." Despite the distance and the issues with his mother, his support was unwavering. It bolstered my spirits, filled me with warmth and determination. But then there was Susan. I broke the news to her one evening, trying to keep the conversation light and straightforward. "Susan, I've been promoted. I'll need to go to another city for a while to train," I explained, hoping to sound as nonchalant as possible. Her reaction was as expected, sour and accusatory. "So, you're running off to another city now? What's really there, Tessa? A lover?" she spat, her words dripping with venom. I sighed, frustration bubbling inside. "It's for training, Susan. There's no lover." "Why is that so hard for you to believe?" She snorted, her expression twisted in disbelief. "Sure, training. Just convenient timing, isn't it? As soon as Lucas is gone, you find a reason to leave too." I shook my head, unable to hide my irritation. "Believe what you want, Susan. I'm going, and that's final." With Lucas's blessing ringing in my ears, I packed my bags that night, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of my own home. Susan's persistent mistrust and conspiracy theories had drained me, and the idea of a few weeks away felt like a breath of fresh air. Once I settled into my temporary apartment in the new city, the sense of freedom was palpable. No Susan lurking around every corner, no insinuations or bitter comments at every turn. I was doing well in training, making new connections, and actually enjoying my evenings in peace. I found myself thinking, more than once, how pleasant life was without Susan watching my every move. But then, one ordinary afternoon as I returned from a session, my phone pinged with a new voice message from Susan. The content of that message turned my newfound peace upside down. "Tessa, I hope you're enjoying your time with your lovers, because you won't have a home to come back to. I've taken care of everything. The house is sold. Stay where you are, for all I care. Her voice, cold and triumphant, sent chills down my spine. I replayed the message, my mind racing. It couldn't be true. Lucas hadn't mentioned anything, and he owned the house. Nothing could be done without his signature. Yet, the malicious glee in Susan's voice couldn't be ignored. What had she done? I called Lucas immediately, panic edging my voice, but the call went straight to voicemail. With him still on his business trip and likely in meetings or on a flight, I felt helpless, stuck in another city. The seeds of doubt Susan had planted now sprouting relentless anxiety. As the days passed with no return call from Lucas, my mind conjured up all sorts of disastrous scenarios. Had Susan forged his signature? Was it even legally possible to sell the house like that? The questions tormented me, gnawing at my focus and sleep. Despite the turmoil, I forced myself to continue with the training. I had worked too hard to let Susan's potentially empty threats derail my progress here. By the end of the training program, I was mentally exhausted, not just from the courses, but from the emotional roller coaster Susan had sent me on. I walked into the house, my mind still reeling from the chaos of the past few weeks. There, in the middle of the living room, stood Susan, squinting at me as if she couldn't quite make out who I was. She wasn't wearing her glasses again, which explained the unsure look on her face. But as I got closer, her expression shifted to one of smug triumph. "Welcome back, Tessa," she said, her voice dripping with a venomous cheerfulness. "I have some news for you." I dropped my bag by the door, bracing myself. "What now, Susan?" She thrust a stack of papers at me. "Here, read this. It's all settled. The house has been sold. You don't belong here anymore, or in this family for that matter." Her words were cold, calculated. Her claim was so outrageous that for a moment, I was too shocked to speak. "What are you talking about? Lucas would never agree to sell our house without discussing it with me first." "Oh, but he did. And he's tired, Tessa. Tired of your endless affairs," she added, a harsh edge to her voice. I snatched the papers from her hands, my heart pounding as I flipped through them. My eyes scanned the document quickly at first, then more carefully as something caught my attention. A laugh escaped my lips, not from amusement but from sheer disbelief. Susan looked at me, puzzled and clearly irritated. "What's so funny?" "Here," I said, pushing the papers back into her hands. "Put on your glasses and read it aloud. Read what you've signed." Reluctantly, she fumbled for her glasses, put them on, and started reading. "This agreement, made and entered into this day by and between." Her voice faltered as she continued, the realization dawning slowly. "This isn't a sale contract. It's a loan agreement for consulting services?" "Yes, Susan. That's right. You didn't sell the house. You signed up for a high-interest loan from some scam artists who took advantage of you." Susan's face went pale, her hands trembling as she held the document. "But I thought I was selling the house. There was an ad in the paper, and the man was so convincing. He said it could all be done without bothering Lucas with the details, that it was better this way." "You thought you'd sell my house out from under me? Without even a real check on what you were signing?" I was incredulous, anger and disbelief warring within me. Tears started streaming down her face, her earlier composure crumbling. "I just wanted to protect my son from you and your infidelities. I didn't mean for this to happen. I forgot my glasses, and everything seemed so legitimate." I stared at her, the weight of everything she'd put me through bearing down on me. "Susan, you have gone too far this time. You need to leave. Now." With a heavy heart but a clear resolve, I watched as Susan packed a few belongings into her bag, still sobbing, still muttering apologies. As she walked out the door, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. When Lucas returned from his business trip, I had a lot to tell him. As soon as he put down his bags, I started to unload everything that had happened, from Susan's attempted deception to the fake documents. He listened, his face growing tighter and more serious with every detail I shared. After I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, just staring at the ground. Then, he looked up, his jaw set. "This is unbelievable. It's time we taught Mom a serious lesson. What she planned to do was way out of line," he said, his voice firm and angry. However, the next day, after a tearful confrontation with Susan, where she pleaded ignorance and desperation, Lucas decided we needed legal advice. We consulted a lawyer to understand the full implications of what Susan had done. The lawyer was pretty clear. "From a legal standpoint, your mother-in-law voluntarily took out that loan and signed the contract. She's liable for the repayment," he explained in a no-nonsense tone. Susan's face when she heard that news was something I could never forget. She had thought she could manipulate her way out of the situation, but reality hit hard. She was on the hook for a significant amount of money, and there was no easy way out. She had to find a job, and fast. Within weeks, she started working 2 shifts, just to make ends meet. With Susan now occupied and no longer having time to meddle in our lives, Lucas and I finally found some peace. We decided it was a good time to take a break, to give ourselves a chance to heal and bond again after the chaos. We went to Hawaii for a second honeymoon, and it was blissful. We talked a lot about our future during those long, leisurely walks along the beach. "I think we're ready to think about having a baby, don't you?" Lucas said one evening, the sunset casting warm glows on his face. I smiled, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. "Yes, I do. Let's enjoy being us for a bit longer, and then let's go for it." "Sounds perfect," he replied, kissing me gently. Now, back from Hawaii, life feels lighter, simpler. We spend our weekends planning the garden, redecorating the house, just enjoying each other's company. Lucas supports me in everything, including my career and our future family plans. We've discussed timelines, how we're going to manage our work-life balance, and how excited we are to be parents. It's a new chapter for us, one that's filled with hope and looking forward. Growing up, I always felt like the backdrop in a 2-person play, starring my sister, Lily, as the cherished lead. Our parents never tried to hide their preference for her. It was like living in a house where I was the guest, and Lily was the princess. From as early as I can remember, Lily got everything: the best dresses, the new toys, and most importantly, their attention. I got hand-me-downs, stuff from bargain bins, and the occasional nod that yes, I existed too. One evening, I was about 10, I remember sitting at the dinner table. Dad was going on about Lily's school project. "Look at this castle Lily made. Isn't it something?" Dad said, his eyes lighting up like Christmas trees as he held up a glitter-covered cardboard castle. Mom nodded, beaming at Lily. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You're so talented." I had made a volcano that actually erupted, but it was sitting on the other end of the table, unnoticed. "Mine erupts," I muttered, but no one paid attention. Lily, with her bright green eyes sparkling, leaned over and whispered loud enough for only me to hear. "It's just baking soda and vinegar. Not a big deal." I clenched my fists under the table, feeling my face heat up. But I stayed quiet. Arguing with Lily only made things worse, because somehow, I always ended up being the bad guy. Grandma was the only one who saw through it all. She lived with us, thank God, and she was my one ally. One day, after a particularly nasty episode where Lily had blamed me for breaking a vase I hadn't even touched, Grandma pulled me aside. "You know, Anna, your parents might not see everything, but I do. You're just as special, never doubt that," she said, her voice firm and reassuring. "I wish they could see that too," I replied, looking down at my scuffed shoes. Grandma hugged me tightly. "I've told your dad time and again. Children should be loved equally." But it never changed. As we grew up, Lily turned into a master of manipulation. She had our parents wrapped around her finger, and anything she did wrong somehow got pinned on me. One day, I overheard her talking on the phone with a friend. "Anna is such a loser. She thinks Mom and Dad actually care about her. It's hilarious." I stormed into her room, furious. Why do you have to be like this, Lily? What have I ever done to you? She just smirked, her red hair like a halo of fire around her wicked grin. Oh, Anna, don't be such a drama queen. Everyone knows I'm the good one here. I wanted to yell, to scream that she wasn't, that she was lying and cruel. But I knew better. It would just end in tears, mine. Instead, I walked away, my heart pounding, knowing I had to get out of this house as soon as I could. When high school ended, and I got into college, I was ready to leave and never look back. But my parents refused to pay for my tuition. They said it was because I wasn't serious enough about my future. Luckily, Grandma stepped in. She paid my fees, telling me to use this chance to build a life for myself, away from the shadow of my sister. College was like stepping into another world, one where no one knew about Lily or how I was always the second choice in my family. It felt like I could finally breathe, like I was shedding an old skin that never really fit me in the first place. The first person I met on campus was Carla, my roommate. She was from another state and didn't know a thing about me, which was refreshing. Carla had this straightforward way of talking that I wasn't used to back home. Hey, I'm Carla. You're Anna, right? Let's make this room cool, okay? She said as soon as I walked into our tiny dorm room, her words direct and devoid of any pretense. Sure, sounds good to me, I replied, grateful for her easy demeanor. In those first few weeks, Carla showed me around, introducing me to her friends and pulling me into her social circle. I was hesitant at first, unsure how to act when no one expected me to fail or fade into the background. Hanging out with Carla and her friends, I realized they spoke their minds, no filters, no walking on eggshells. It was all straightforward and, honestly, kind of liberating. Anna, you gotta loosen up. We're all here to have a good time, not judge each other. Carla said one night as we sat in the common room, surrounded by laughter and the smell of microwave popcorn. I know, I'm just not used to this, I admitted, feeling a bit out of place, but welcome at the same time. Well, get used to it. You're with us now, she said with a wink. As the semester went on, I started joining study groups, attending class regularly, and really throwing myself into my marketing courses. My professors noticed. Miss Grant, your project was impressive. You have a knack for this, Professor Jacobs commented one day after class, handing back a paper I'd written with a high grade on it. Thank you, Professor. I really enjoyed working on it, I said, feeling a pride I hadn't known before. At the end of my first year, I got a summer internship at a local marketing firm. I was over the moon. I called Grandma to tell her the news. That's wonderful, Anna. I knew you could do it. Grandma's voice crackled over the phone, filled with genuine pride. Thanks, Grandma. I couldn't have done it without your help, I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. And you'll do even more. Just watch, she said, her confidence in me unshakable. By the time senior year rolled around, I was a different person. I had confidence, real friends, and a career path that excited me. College gave me the freedom to be who I wanted to be, away from the shadow of my family's expectations and Lily's manipulative antics. After graduation, I landed a job at a well-known cosmetology company in the city. But it wasn't just my career that was about to change, my personal life was on the brink of something entirely new. It all started at a city exhibition where different companies showcased their products. I was in charge of our company's booth, explaining the benefits of our latest skincare line to anyone who showed interest. Looks like you really know your stuff, a voice said from behind me. I turned around to see a tall guy with an easy smile watching me. Thanks. I try, I responded, brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. I'm Michael, he introduced himself, extending his hand. Anna, I replied, shaking his hand. There was an immediate, undeniable spark. We chatted casually at first about the products and the exhibition. But then, the conversation shifted. Michael was funny, throwing jokes left and right, making me laugh more than I had in a long while. And so, half-jokingly, we set up a date for the following weekend. Dinner turned into seeing each other almost every weekend after that. Michael was different. He listened when I talked, really listened. He cared about what I thought and felt, which was a new and wonderful experience for me. The months flew by, filled with little moments and big feelings. Before I knew it, a year had passed, and we were seriously discussing our future together. One night, over a quiet dinner at our favorite little Italian place, Michael looked more serious than usual. He took a deep breath. "Anna, how would you feel about making this official? Like, really official?" I knew what he meant, but I needed to hear him say it. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" I prompted him. Michael nodded, taking my hands in his. "Marry me, Anna. Let's start our own story." Tears sprang to my eyes, not from sadness, but from a profound happiness that flooded through me. "Yes, Michael, I'll marry you." Getting engaged to Michael was like a dream. I was over the moon, floating through my days with a goofy grin plastered on my face. But when it came to actually planning the wedding, reality hit hard and fast, especially when my family got involved. I remember calling my parents to tell them the news. Their response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice, dear," Mom said, her voice strained. "But are you sure about this? You know how these things can be rushed." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my cool. "Yes, Mom, I'm sure. Michael is great, and we're really happy together." "Well, if you say so," she sighed, and then quickly changed the subject. The trouble really started when I went home to discuss the wedding plans. The air was thick with tension the minute I stepped into the house. Dad was the first to bring up the elephant in the room. "You know, Lily should really help with the wedding. She has such good taste," Dad suggested, casting a meaningful glance at Mom. Lily, who'd been surprisingly quiet, suddenly lit up. "Oh, absolutely. I'd love to help plan your wedding, Anna." I was suspicious. Lily and helping didn't usually go in the same sentence unless it benefited her directly. But before I could decline, Mom chimed in. "It would be such a nice way to bond before the big day. And think about it, Anna, with your work schedule, do you really have the time to manage everything?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. I was too busy, and maybe, just maybe, Lily had changed. How wrong I was. Weeks went by, and every time I called Lily to check on the progress, she reassured me with her sweetest voice. "Everything's under control, sis. I booked the venue, and wait till you see the decorations I planned." 2 weeks before the wedding, I took a day off to see everything for myself. The venue was booked, all right, but that was about it. No caterer, no decorator, no nothing. It was a disaster waiting to happen. I called Lily, my voice shaking with anger. "What the hell, Lily? You said everything was taken care of." "Oh, calm down, Anna. You're always so dramatic. It's all going to be fine." She brushed me off. "Fine? There's nothing done. Were you planning to ruin my wedding?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, in a voice dripping with feigned innocence, she said, "I don't know what you're talking about. Everything will be ready, trust me." I hung up, fuming. No way I was going to let her mess this up. I called my friend Janet, who had an impressive experience with event planning. "Janet, I'm in a bind. Can you help me salvage my wedding?" "Of course, Anna. Don't worry, we'll make sure your day is perfect. What's done is done. Let's fix this," Janet responded, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. With Janet's help, we started from scratch. It was a mad dash of booking, tasting, and organizing, but slowly things started coming together. The day before the wedding, I confronted Lily again. This time in person. She just shrugged. "Look, I did what I could. If that's not enough for you, then maybe you're expecting too much," Lily said, her voice cool and detached. I expected my sister to have my back. Clearly, I was wrong. I replied, my voice steady, despite the anger boiling inside. Despite all the setbacks, the wedding day arrived, and it was everything I had hoped for and more. The venue looked beautiful, the food was delicious, and the music set the perfect mood. As I danced with Michael, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world, I almost forgot about the chaos Lily had tried to cause. Almost. But as the evening wore on, the inevitable couldn't be avoided. It was time for the speeches, and my heart sank as Lily stepped up to the microphone, her smile a little too sweet. "Hello, everyone." Lily's voice was bright, carrying over the crowd. "I just want to say how happy I am for Anna and Michael. Being the maid of honor and the wedding planner was such an honor." I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. The lies were too much. She was taking credit for everything Janet and I had scrambled to fix. My hands clenched into fists under the table, but Michael squeezed my hand, giving me a look that said, "Let it go." But then Mom took the microphone from Lily, her eyes glistening with pride, for Lily, not for me. "And we need to thank Lily for saving the day. We are so proud of how you stepped up. Anna, you should be grateful to have such a wonderful sister." That was it. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Actually," I started, my voice loud enough to draw every eye in the room to me. I stood, my chair scraping back sharply. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The room went silent, all chatter stopping as everyone waited for what I would say next. "Lily didn't plan this," I said, my voice steady, despite the shaking in my legs. 2 weeks before today, I found out nothing was prepared. No flowers, no caterer, not even a cake. If it wasn't for my friend Janet, who is here tonight, this day would have been a disaster. Lily stood up, her chair clattering behind her. "That's not true. I did so much for this wedding. Anna, why are you always trying to make me look bad? Why? You wanted this day to fail," I said, turning to face him, then the crowd. "I have the emails from the vendors, messages saying they hadn't heard from anyone until I contacted them." Lily's expression faltered, then burst into tears, running from the room. The dramatic exit, another classic move. The rest of the evening was a blur. Some guests whispered and shot me sympathetic looks, while others seemed to buy into Lily's tearful act. It hurt, but at least now, some people knew the truth. As the party wound down, Michael held me close, whispering, "We're married now. That's all that matters." He was right. Despite the drama, we were together, and that was the most important thing. But as we left the venue, I couldn't help but feel the sting of my family's doubts, and Lily's treachery lingering in the air. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. My sister Lily disappeared, leaving behind nothing but her car, her purse, and a damning note that pointed the finger straight at me. The note was a masterstroke in her ongoing drama, claiming my supposed cruelty drove her to think about ending her life. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My parents, already cool towards me thanks to Lily's theatrics at the wedding, now turned ice cold. The phone call from my mom about Lily's disappearance is etched into my mind, her voice cold and accusing. "Anna, your sister is gone. She left a note, and she blames you. She said you've been cruel, that you pushed her to this," Mom said, each word like a dagger. "That's ridiculous. I haven't done anything to her. You know how she is, how she twists things," I shot back, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and despair. "Enough, Anna. Your sister is missing, possibly worse, and all you can think about is defending yourself," she snapped before hanging up. The accusations didn't stop there. Relatives, friends, even neighbors seemed to have read the script Lily left behind, all casting me as the villain in her twisted story. But the worst blow came from Grandma, the one person I thought I could always count on. When I went to see her, hoping for some support, she met me with a frosty gaze, her disappointment palpable. "Anna, I can't believe you. Your sister felt so tormented she had to run away. And all you can say is that it's a lie?" Grandma's voice was stern, her usual warm tone gone. "Grandma, please, you know me. I would never hurt Lily," I pleaded, feeling the tears start to well up. Grandma shook her head, her expression hardening. "I thought I knew you. But Lily's note. Anna, she was clearly in a lot of pain. And no truth you wanted to prove is worth her life." "But it's not the truth." I protested, my voice rising in desperation. I think it's best if you leave. I need to think about all this, about where we all went wrong, she said, turning away from me, signaling the conversation was over. Walking away from Grandma's house that day felt like leaving my last safe haven. Betrayed and isolated, the weight of the entire situation bore down on me, crushing. As the days turned into weeks, with no word from Lily, the strain started to show in every aspect of my life. Michael tried to be supportive, but the constant stress was a wedge between us. Anna, maybe it's time to just let it go. Maybe stop trying to defend yourself and just move on, Michael suggested one evening, his voice weary. How can I move on? My own family thinks I'm a monster. How do we just live with that? I snapped, frustration boiling over. I felt utterly alone, surrounded by people who either believed the worst about me or didn't know how to help. And with Lily gone, the narrative she crafted seemed to solidify into an undeniable truth in the eyes of everyone around me. With each passing day adding weight to the loneliness I felt. Michael, the one person I believed would always be by my side, had grown distant. His frequent business trips to another city only widened the chasm between us. It wasn't just emotional distance, something tangible had shifted, and the receipt I found one afternoon was the grim proof. Stuffed carelessly between the pages of a magazine on our coffee table was a receipt for women's clothing, expensive clothing, the kind you buy when you want to impress someone. The kind you don't buy for your wife and then forget to mention. At first, denial took over. There must be some explanation, a surprise maybe? But the cold, hard doubt crept in, gnawing at me. After everything with Lily and the family, this felt like another bitter betrayal. I needed answers. I hired a private detective. It felt so cliché, like something out of a bad movie, but what other options did I have? I gave him all the details, Michael's travel schedule, the receipt, everything. He called a couple of weeks later. I have the results of the investigation, he said, his voice neutral. I'll drop off the full report and the photos tomorrow. It's best if you see everything for yourself. The next day, armed with the report and a sealed envelope of photos, I felt like I was on the verge of a breakdown. But there was one thing I needed to do before confronting Michael. I needed to talk to Grandma. Grandma looked frail, her illness having taken a visible toll on her. But when she saw me, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, surprise, confusion, maybe a hint of relief. Anna, what are you doing here? She asked, her voice weaker than I remembered. I needed to see you, I said, stepping inside, feeling the weight of the envelope in my hand. We sat in her living room, the air thick with unsaid words. I handed her the envelope, watching her hands tremble slightly as she opened it and pulled out the photos. I watched her face as she looked at each photo, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to sadness. Then she looked up at me, tears in her eyes. Oh, Anna. I had no idea, she whispered, the realization dawning on her. Grandma, I know things have been awful between us. I know you felt I pushed Lily away, but these show a different story, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She reached out, her hand gripping mine tightly. I was wrong, Anna. I'm so sorry. Your sister, she deceived me too, not just you. Grandma passed away quietly 2 weeks after our last conversation, and we gathered at her house for her will reading. The air was heavy with the scent of old books and faint floral perfume, a smell that always reminded me of Grandma. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, steeling myself for what was to come. Then the door swung open dramatically, and there she was, Lily, her red hair just as fiery as I remembered, her smirk as smug as ever. The room erupted. My parents burst into tears, rushing to embrace her, cries of joy mingling with sighs of relief. Everyone was shocked, everyone except me. Lily didn't waste a moment, striding over to Michael with that confident swagger, planting a kiss on his lips like she owned him. The gasps that followed were audible, the shock palpable. She turned to face me, that smirk still playing on her lips. I planned it all, Anna, she said, her voice loud and clear for everyone to hear. I made sure Grandma would turn against you, thinking she'd leave everything to me. Pretty clever, huh? The room froze, all eyes on us. Michael moved to sit next to Lily, their hands finding each other like pieces of a sinister puzzle falling into place. I felt the eyes on me, waiting for a breakdown, a scream, tears, anything. But I was done with the theatrics. I met Lily's gaze with a calm I barely felt. "Are you done?" I asked, my voice even. Her smile faltered, not expecting my composure. The notary cleared his throat, ready to read Grandma's will. You could hear a pin drop as he unfolded the papers, his voice solemn. I, Eleanor Thompson, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeath all my property and assets to. There was a pause, a cruel stretch of silence, before he continued. Anna Grant. Lily's face, Michael's face, it was a picture. The shock, the disbelief, the betrayal. It was all there, raw and unfiltered. Michael looked at me, then at Lily, his expression one of a man defeated. "I knew about everything," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "I knew you were hiding in the city Michael frequently visited for his business trips. I knew about the affair." I pulled out the photos and evidence the detective had gathered and tossed them on the table. The room erupted into chaos, voices raised in shock, anger, disbelief. My parents, still clinging to their golden child, looked at me with eyes full of questions and accusations. Lily and Michael started blubbering, apologies and excuses spilling out. "Anna, please, we didn't mean." "Save it," I cut them off, my heart hardening against their fake pleas. "I'm filing for divorce, and I want compensation for the betrayal." My statement was met with stunned silence, then more whispers. Lily tried to reach out, tears streaming down her face, but I was done. "You made your choice," I told her coldly. After the meeting, as the room cleared, I stayed back, letting the reality of everything wash over me. The money, the property, it meant nothing compared to the betrayal. I signed the necessary papers, my signature steady, my resolve clear. Life moved on. I settled the divorce, received the compensation, and started rebuilding my life, piece by piece. It was hard, harder than anything I'd ever done. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own story. Hi, I'm Hannah. Growing up, I had everything a kid could want, loving parents and a cozy home. I was their only kid, and they spoiled me with love, not just stuff. They were big on education too, so after high school, I headed off to college and then landed a job as a travel agent. For over a decade, I hustled at a city travel agency, learning the ropes of the trade. After my folks passed, they left me a bit of money. Nothing crazy, but enough to make me think about starting my own thing. That's how I ended up opening my own travel agency. It was tough in the beginning, like, really tough. I had to scrape and claw for every client I got. But I made it work, and soon enough, the agency started doing alright, even thinking about expanding. I always believed in looking sharp, especially at work and public events. You never know who you're gonna meet, right? So, there I was, a regular at this little salon on the corner of my street, getting my hair done by Marie, a sweet woman in her 60s with hands of magic. We'd chat about everything, my business, her salon, the latest gossip. One day, Marie got all excited while she was washing my hair. "You know, Hannah, I've got a son, Mark. Such a handsome guy, and smart too. But still single. You should meet him." I was a bit taken aback, but went along with it. "Sure, why not? Could be fun." She beamed. "Great. I'll set something up." Fast forward, and I'm sitting across from Mark at a cozy little diner downtown. He was cute, alright, and had a way with numbers, working as a financial expert or something fancy like that. We hit it off, talking about everything from our favorite movies to our crazy work schedules. You gotta have some crazy stories with a job like yours. Yeah, there's never a dull moment, that's for sure. What about you? Any crazy stock market stories? I sipped my coffee, watching his face light up, talking about his day-to-day. Nothing too wild. It's mostly numbers and grumpy old men, Mark shrugged, grinning. But it pays the bills, and then some. We talked for hours, closing the place down. It was easy, comfortable. And just like that, Marie's matchmaking wasn't such a bad idea after all. After Mark and I got hitched, things took a turn. The wedding was a blast, full of laughter and dancing, but the next day it was like I woke up next to a different person. Well, not Mark, he was still the laid-back guy I fell for, but his mom, Marie, she flipped a switch or something. We were having breakfast, just a couple of days after the ceremony, when Marie dropped the bomb. "Hannah, darling, you and Mark should really think about getting a bigger place, you know? Something fitting for a growing family," she said, stirring her tea a bit too vigorously. I choked on my coffee a bit. A bigger place? We just got settled here." Mark chimed in, with that "let's not start a fight" look. "Mom's got a point, Hannah. We could use the extra space. Maybe something with a yard?" I gave him a look. "Sure, I guess. We can start looking." But Marie wasn't just talking about any house. No, she wanted us to buy a huge place, like the kind you see in magazines. And the kicker? She wanted in. Not just as a visitor, but living with us. "Hannah, think about it. If I moved in, I could help out around the house. I'm planning to leave the salon, start something fresh. I've been looking into blogging, maybe a lifestyle thing, you know?" She was all excited, eyes shining. I tried to keep it cool, but inside, I was freaking out. "Blogging, huh? That's interesting. But living together? That's a big step." Marie nodded eagerly. "Exactly. And with my blog, once it takes off, I'll be more than able to contribute." The next thing I knew, I was nodding along, agreeing to house hunt. We ended up with a gorgeous place, way beyond what I thought we needed, but it had that charm, you know? When I saw Marie's eyes light up, I thought, maybe this isn't so bad. Then came moving day. Marie had boxes and boxes of stuff, way more than Mark and I combined. As we unpacked, she directed traffic like a general. No, that box goes in the upstairs hall. And can you put those books in the guest room? It'll be my office." As the weeks went by, Marie's true colors showed. She'd taken over the house, redecorating without asking, and her helping out turned into giving orders. "Hannah, I need you to pick up some things for my new blog setup. Oh, and we need better lighting in here, it's for the blog." I felt cornered, not just by the bills and the new house, but by this whole new family dynamic I hadn't signed up for. "Alright, I guess. We'll look into it." Lying in bed that night, I turned to Mark. "Do you really think all this is necessary? The house, your mom's blog?" Mark was quick to reassure. "It's all gonna work out, Hannah. Trust me, it's all part of settling in." Settling in, right. I signed up for a husband, not a housemate who doubled as my mother-in-law and lifestyle coach. I drifted off, wondering just how much of my new married life would be spent in the shadow of Marie's grand plans. Living with Marie and Mark was turning out to be tougher than I'd ever imagined. Mark's spending was off the charts. Almost every other day, he'd come home with something pricey, a new watch, some fancy shoes, or talking about his latest round at some upscale golf club. He even set aside a whole room just to store and display his collections of high-end watches and leather shoes. I tried to keep things chic, but affordable on my end, believing we weren't at the luxury splurge stage yet. This difference in our spending habits was becoming a regular source of friction between us. "Mark, do we really need more watches? Maybe we should be saving a bit more," I said one evening as he unpacked yet another purchase. "Hannah, I make good money. I should be able to enjoy it," he snapped, not looking up from his new shiny gadget. The conversation always ended there, with him shutting down any further discussion. Meanwhile, Marie was on a roll with her new blogging venture. It had started gaining traction faster than any of us expected. But with the fame, her demands grew too. One day, she came to me with a request, or more accurately, a demand that took me by surprise. Hannah, darling, I've been thinking. To keep up with my blog's image, I need to get some work done. A facelift, maybe tweak my nose a bit. You know, freshen up, Marie announced as if discussing the weather. I was flabbergasted. Marie, that sounds expensive. And cosmetic surgery? Are you sure? She was all smiles. Oh, absolutely. It's an investment in my career. And you know, being in the public eye now requires looking my best. I frowned. But that's a lot of money, Marie. Money that could go to our household needs. Marie's tone shifted, turning sharper. Hannah, you know how much this blog means to me. It's finally something of my own. I thought you, of all people, would understand. I was about to protest when she played her card. Besides, it's not just for me. It benefits all of us, doesn't it? And I'd hate for any misunderstandings to crop up between you and Mark because you weren't supportive. Her implication was clear: help her out, or she'd stir trouble with Mark. Knowing how she could influence him, I felt my hands were tied. Despite my reservations, I agreed to finance her procedures. Marie underwent the surgery, and it was all she could talk about afterward. Her blog posts about embracing plastic surgery, not fearing the knife, and the importance of looking good raked in more views and comments than ever before. She was proud, reveling in the attention and praise, while I watched our bank account dwindle and wondered if I'd ever be able to pull us back from this spending spiral. 2 years into our marriage, and it felt like I was the only one truly pulling weight around here. My travel agency had really taken off, and I was proud to say that I was the main breadwinner. Not only did I handle all our bills, but I also paid our mortgage all by myself. Day in and day out, I juggled work, home, and everything in between. At night, I'd cook meals tailored to Marie's special diet, keeping the household running smoothly. To anyone looking from the outside, my life with Mark and his mother Marie looked picture perfect. Marie never missed a chance to gush about our wonderful family life and a beautiful home on her blog, painting a pretty picture for her followers. However, the reality inside our walls was a bit different, especially when it came to Marie's latest obsession, her live streaming. One Tuesday morning, this reality came crashing in during one of her broadcasts. I was in the middle of preparing a dietary breakfast for Marie when she decided it was the perfect time to put me on the spot. The kitchen was bustling, Marie with her phone out, capturing every mundane detail for her followers. And here's the star of the house, my wonderful daughter-in-law, Hannah, Marie announced, thrusting her phone in my direction as I was halfway through flipping an omelette. Morning, everyone, I said, managing a tight smile, not wanting to drop the omelette in front of the live audience. Hannah here is the best when it comes to travel. Tell us, dear, what's the latest in the world of travel? Marie chirped, the camera focusing on me. Clearing my throat, I set down the spatula. Well, there are some exciting travel deals coming up, especially for those looking to escape the winter chill. Marie's eyes sparkled with an idea, and she leaned closer, her voice a pitch too cheerful. Speaking of travel, Hannah, why don't you share with our lovely viewers your fabulous idea for our next family vacation? I believe South Africa was mentioned? I was blindsided. South Africa? I echoed, my mind racing. This wasn't just an impromptu Q&A, this was Marie setting the stage for something much bigger. Yes, a luxury trip to South Africa. Safari tours, 5-star hotels, the works. Viewers, wouldn't you just love to see us on safari? I'm sure Hannah can arrange something spectacular. Her followers immediately chimed in with excitement, their comments flooding the live feed. Pressure mounted as I tried to keep my composure. Well, it's definitely an option, I said, trying to stay non-committal. But let's discuss it later, off camera. As soon as Marie ended the stream, I turned to her, frustration bubbling over. Marie, we need to talk about this. You can't just plan things and announce them without discussing them with me first, especially not live. Marie was unflappable as ever, sipping her coffee. Oh, lighten up, Hannah. It's good for the blog. And good for your business too, don't you think? It's not about the blog, I pushed back, feeling cornered. It's about respecting each other's roles in this family. You can't use your followers to pressure me into decisions. I left the room, leaving Marie to make her far-reaching plans. That evening, things escalated when she complained to Mark. She spun the story, painting me as rude and dismissive of her ideas, claiming I was getting too big for my boots. Mark stormed into the kitchen where I was cleaning up. His face was thunderous. "Hannah, we need to talk. Now." He didn't wait for my response, just marched into the living room and I followed, my stomach in knots. He spun around, his words sharp as knives. "Mom tells me you're disrespecting her ideas, acting like you're the one who calls all the shots. That's not how we're supposed to work as a family." I was taken aback, the unfairness of the accusation stinging. "Mark, that's not true. I've always supported your mom, but nothing, Hannah. You know how important her blog is to her. And if you can't support us, maybe you shouldn't be part of this family," he interrupted, his voice cold. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I tried to reason with him, to explain my side, but he was having none of it. "I've even prepared divorce papers, Hannah. I keep them just in case you decide not to follow through with our plans." The words felt like a slap. I spent the night in our guest room, crying, feeling more alone than ever. The idea that Mark would keep such a thing ready was heartbreaking. The next morning, still reeling from the night's threats, I felt a wave of nausea that wouldn't pass. It was more than stress, something was off. I called in sick at work and made my way to the doctor's office, the weight of the world on my shoulders. Sitting in the sterile doctor's office, I was going through the motions, answering questions mechanically until the doctor gave me the news that shifted everything. "You're pregnant," he said, looking at me over his glasses. Pregnant. The word echoed in my mind, a beacon of hope in the turmoil of my marital strife. At 37, this was a moment I had hoped for, but never let myself believe would happen. Despite the chaos at home, this news filled a space in my heart with pure joy. I went home, a plan forming. Maybe this baby was a sign, a reason to mend fences. I found Mark in the office, his demeanor still frosty. "Mark, I went to the doctor today," I started, my voice steady, despite the shaking inside. He looked up, wary. And we're going to have a baby," I said, letting the words hang in the air. The change in Mark was instantaneous. His face softened, the edges of anger smoothing out. He stood up, coming over to wrap me in his arms. "Really? That's great, Hannah. I'm sorry about last night. Things will be different now." Relief washed over me, mingled with caution. But there was work to be done if I was going to keep this family together. In a move to bridge the gap, I took the initiative to plan the trip to South Africa that Marie had so publicly put on the agenda. I threw myself into the arrangements, booking excursions to Cape Town and Johannesburg, a safari in a national reserve, and trips to both a desert and lush waterfalls. The trip to South Africa was supposed to be a fresh start, a way to mend the growing rifts at home. Instead, it spiraled into a disaster from the very start. As soon as we boarded the plane, Marie began complaining about everything, the length of the flight, the turbulence, and even the meals served on board. "It's way too long. How could you book such an uncomfortable flight, Hannah?" Marie grumbled as another wave of turbulence shook the cabin. Trying to keep my tone even, I replied, "Marie, it's the shortest route available. There's nothing I can do about the flight duration or the turbulence." Her complaints didn't let up, and by the time we landed, I was already exhausted. But that was just the beginning. At the hotel, Marie's dissatisfaction found new targets. The moment we checked in, she started on about the hotel not living up to its online reputation. "This place? This is where we're staying? I expected something far better, given the pictures online. Hannah, are you sure this is the right hotel?" she criticized loudly as we stood at reception. Mark, as always, was quick to back her up. "Yeah, Hannah, Mom's got a point. It doesn't look like what we saw on the website." Feeling the sting of their joint disapproval, I managed to say, "This is one of the best-rated hotels in the area. I'm sorry it's not what you expected, but let's try to make the best of it." Despite my efforts to keep things positive, Marie's and Mark's displeasure only deepened. Marie found fault with every aspect of the hotel, from the service to the food, and Mark echoed her every sentiment. It didn't help that I was feeling increasingly unwell, the early stages of my pregnancy making it hard to keep up with the demanding schedule of tours and activities I had planned. The tipping point came after yet another day of excursions that neither of them enjoyed. Marie summoned me to her room for a serious talk. The moment I entered, she launched into a tirade. "Hannah, you are by far the worst travel specialist I've ever seen. You've completely ruined our trip," she accused, her voice sharp and cold. Stunned, I tried to defend my efforts. "Marie, I've arranged everything according to what we discussed. I'm trying my best here." But she wasn't having any of it. Grabbing my arm, she nearly shouted, "Get out of here, Hannah. Stop ruining our vacation." Before I could react, she pushed me out and slammed the door. Shaken, I returned to my room, only to find my suitcase outside the door. Mark was there, his expression hard and unsympathetic. "I can't deal with this anymore, Hannah. You being sick all the time, it's too much. I think it's best if you leave," he said, his voice void of the warmth I once knew. Feeling a mix of disbelief and heartbreak, I picked up my suitcase. Without a word, I left the hotel. I felt incredibly unwell, my body and mind pushed to their limits. At that moment, all I wanted was to be back in the safety of my own home in the USA. The flight back was agonizing. Every turbulence shook me not just physically, but also emotionally, my stomach churning with pain and distress. I landed back home with a sharp ache that seemed to gnaw deeper with each passing moment. Instead of the comfort of home, my first stop was the emergency room. The diagnosis confirmed my worst fears. I had suffered a miscarriage. As I lay there, trying to process the loss, my phone lit up with countless missed calls from Mark and Marie. With a heavy heart, I called back, only to be thrust into another chaotic situation. Marie's voice crackled through the line, frantic and demanding. "Hannah, it's all gone wrong here. We've been robbed, our documents, our money, everything. And it's gotten even worse," she blurted out, barely pausing for breath. Trying to steady my voice, I asked, "What happened, Marie?" She continued, her voice tinged with panic. "We were out, and I was filming for my blog, just a normal day, when someone snatched our bags. And when I complained about it to the hotel staff, they were so rude, I had to tell them off. They called the police on us, and now we're in jail. You have to help us, Hannah." Her words swirled in my head, piling onto the mountain of stress I was already under. "Marie, I'm in the hospital," I said, my voice breaking. "I've had a miscarriage." There was a brief silence on the line. Then Mark's voice came through, his tone anger and impatience. "It doesn't matter, Hannah, we really need you right now. This is serious, we could be stuck here." The lack of sympathy, the sheer audacity to dismiss my pain so quickly, it was like a slap in the face. "I'm not going to help you. Handle it yourselves." Without waiting for a response, I hung up, a mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief coursing through me. In that lonely hospital room, as I grieved the child I would never hold, I made a silent vow to myself. I would start anew, rebuild, and never let my sense of self be compromised again. The day I was discharged from the hospital marked the start of my new life. I went straight home to finalize the severance of my ties to Mark and Marie. With a steady hand, I signed the divorce papers that Mark had prepared earlier. Afterward, I gathered every item that belonged to him and his mother, clothes, personal belongings, the countless shoes, and watches that had filled our space with the excess of their lives. Everything was packed up and delivered to their cramped old apartment in the city. With that chapter closed, I took the next step. I sold the house I had bought with my hard-earned money, the house that was meant to be a home for us but never truly felt like one. Selling it was freeing, not just from the mortgage and the memories, but from the life I was so desperately trying to fit into. 2 months passed, and Mark and Marie were deported back from South Africa, arriving with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a phone in their hands. Their shock was palpable when they found strangers living in their home. The new owners, uninterested in their plight, threatened to call the police if they didn't clear off their property. Marie's voice was shaking with fury when she called me. "Hannah, what the hell is going on? Where are all our things? Why are strangers in our house?" I replied with a calm I hardly felt. "Marie, the house was mine. I paid for it, and it was in my name. I've sold it. All your things are in your old apartment. As for Mark and you, I'm done. We're divorced. I won't be dragged back into your chaos." There was a pause, the kind that told me she was struggling to grasp her new reality. "You can't do this to us, Hannah. We have rights," she insisted. "I've done everything by the book, Marie. You're going to have to accept that. Goodbye." Hanging up the phone felt like shedding a heavy coat in the middle of summer, sudden and immensely relieving. The news eventually came to me through mutual acquaintances that Marie had returned to her job as a hairstylist. Her dreams of blog stardom abandoned alongside her expensive camera equipment. Mark, unable to resume his old job due to his long absence, resorted to driving a taxi. He sold his precious watch collection and wore plain, unbranded clothing. As for me, I moved into a small house on the outskirts of the city. Here, I began rebuilding not just my home but my travel agency as well. The expo was a turning point. People were genuinely interested, and their enthusiasm reignited my own. "Your tours always have that personal touch. How do you do it?" a curious visitor asked, her eyes scanning the brochures. "It's all about understanding what the traveler wants. You listen, adapt, and sometimes, take a leap of faith," I explained, the conversation flowing easily. The expo was more than a success, and before long, I was planning expansions, considering even a potential branch in Europe. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I stopped by a small cafe, a little celebration of my progress. As I sipped my coffee, a young couple at the next table was poring over travel brochures, looking utterly confused. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear. Are you planning a trip?" I asked, the remnants of my shyness about intruding quickly swept away by my enthusiasm. "Yes, but we're so lost. It's our first big trip together, and we want it to be perfect," the woman said, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and frustration. I smiled, pulling out a business card. "Here, give me a call tomorrow at this number. I'll help you sort it out. Travel's supposed to be fun, not stressful." They thanked me profusely, their smiles wide and genuine. It felt good to be able to help, to use my expertise to make someone's experience better. It reminded me why I loved this job in the first place. Dad always said, "Chloe, you're as tough as the old boots I fish in." And he wasn't wrong. Raised in a small town where the winter didn't ask if you were ready before it hit, I grew up pretty fast after Mom passed. All I got of her is a couple of pictures where she's smiling under the brim of Dad's fishing hat, her eyes kind of crinkling at the corners. Dad was a fisherman, started with a beat-up boat that looked like it'd sink if you sneezed too hard. But he had big plans, worked his fingers to the bone, and eventually built up a business that had our name slapped on a huge fish processing plant down by the docks. He was out before sunrise, back after dark, always smelling like the catch of the day. It wasn't like he left me to fend for myself though. Carol, my stepmom, came into our lives when I was about 7. She couldn't have kids of her own, so she poured all that pent-up love into me. We didn't always see eye to eye, especially when I hit those teenage years and got all prickly, but she stuck by me like glue. One night, I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my books spread out, and Dad came in, looking more tired than usual. Carol had fixed him his favorite, salmon, pan-fried just right, and he slumped down at the table, gratefully. "Thanks, love," he said to Carol, then turned to me with a look. "School going okay, kiddo?" "Sakai. Just boring," I shrugged, scribbling something in my notebook. "Boring," she says. "You hear that, Carol? Our girl's gonna be a genius, and she's bored. Dad chuckled, his eyes crinkling like Mom's in those old photos. Carol just smiled, ruffling my hair a bit too roughly. She'd better be, with college costs these days. That was our life. Simple, sometimes a bit rough, but filled with enough laughter to keep the cold out. When high school was done, I was itching to see more than icy roads and fish. I told Dad I wanted to go to California for college. He wasn't too thrilled at first, all that distance, but he knew I had it in me to make something of myself. California, huh? You'll melt out there. He'd joke, but one evening, he got serious. We were fixing one of the nets, hands all tangled up in ropes and seaweed. Dad, I gotta go. It's not enough here for me, I admitted, not wanting to hurt him but needing him to understand. He was quiet for a long moment, just working the ropes. Then, he nodded. All right, Chloe. You go make us proud. But promise you'll call your old man, huh? So I went. Off to California with my dreams in one hand and a promise in the other. Maybe I was naive, maybe just young, but either way, I was ready, or so I thought. Stepping off the plane in California, the sun hit me like a slap in the face, warm and bright and relentless. Not a lick of the cold, harsh winds of Alaska. My first thought? Dad was right, I was gonna melt. College was a whole new world. Campus was buzzing with folks from all corners, talking fast about things I hadn't even heard of. I bunked with a girl named Jess, a local who took one look at my flannel and boots combo and said, "You're not in Alaska anymore, girl." I can see that. I shot back, trying not to feel like a fish out of water. Jess laughed, a good, hearty sound. "You'll fit in just fine. Everyone does eventually." Classes kicked my butt at first. Economics isn't for the faint-hearted, and I had to hustle harder than I thought. Nights were long, coffee-fueled marathons with books and laptops. One day, slumped over a textbook in the library, a guy dropped into the seat opposite me. He had a smile that seemed too easy. "That looks intense. Preparing to take over the world?" "Just trying not to fail my midterms," I said, pushing up the glasses that had slid down my nose. "Ah, the humble student life. I'm Michael, by the way." He extended a hand, and I shook it, noting the firm grip. "Chloe. Nice to meet you," I replied, then went back to my books. Michael was in some of my classes, and we kept bumping into each other. We started having lunch together, sharing complaints about bosses and deadlines. Michael was easy to talk to, made me laugh more than I expected. It wasn't long before we started dating. He was different from the boys back home, smoother, more polished, but with a charm that felt genuine. A few months in, Michael's mom invited us over for dinner. I was nervous, smoothing down my dress, while Michael just grinned and told me, "She's going to love you." His house was nicer than I expected, and his mom, Linda, was all smiles and hugs. She was a bit intense, asking a million questions about Alaska, my dad's business, and my plans for the future. "So, Chloe, Michael tells me you're quite the catch, what with your economics degree and all. You thinking about the long haul with my son here?" she asked, her eyes sharp but not unkind. I choked on my water a bit, coughing while Michael clapped me on the back. "Mom, give her a break," he laughed, but Linda just waved him off. "I'm just saying, it's good to think about these things," she said, serving up more food than I could possibly eat. The night ended with Linda whispering to me as we said goodbye, "You're good for him, Chloe. I can tell." Driving back, Michael was quiet for a long time before he said, "So, what do you think? About us, I mean?" "I like where this is going," I said, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. "Let's see where it leads, okay?" "Okay," he agreed, and for the first time in a long time, California didn't feel quite so far from home. As I lay in bed that night, the distant sound of the ocean in my ears, I thought about Dad and Carol. They'd be happy for me, I figured. Happy that I was finding my way, making connections, maybe even building a future. The wedding was a blur, flowers, smiling faces, and a dress that felt a bit too tight. After all the dancing and cheers, when we finally settled into living at his mom Linda's house, reality started to set in. "Chloe, you'll see, it's easier this way. Mom needs us, and we can save up for our own place," Michael reassured me one evening as we unpacked our wedding gifts in what used to be his old room. "Yeah, I guess you're right," I replied, trying to sound more convinced than I felt. The room still had his high school trophies and old posters on the walls. It didn't feel like ours, it felt like I was just visiting. Things were fine for a while. Linda handled most of the house chores, letting me find my footing at my new job and in this new role as a wife. But about 6 months in, everything changed overnight. "I went to the doctor today, Michael. My back's worse, and he says I need to take it easy," Linda announced one night at dinner, her voice tinged with worry. "Of course, Mom. Chloe and I can take on more around the house, can't we?" Michael said, turning to me. I could only nod, my mind racing with what that meant. Before I knew it, Linda's version of taking it easy meant I was doing everything from cleaning to cooking, with her supervising from a kitchen chair. "You'll want to add more salt to that, dear. Michael likes his food with a bit more flavor," she'd say, watching me fumble around with the spice jars. One day, as I was elbow-deep in scrubbing the bathroom, Michael called me. "Hey, Chloe, Mom's really not doing well." I was thinking, maybe you should consider taking some time off work to handle things around here. I stopped scrubbing, the sponge dripping in my hand. "Take time off? Michael, I just started getting the hang of things there," I protested, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. "It's just temporary, babe. For Mom. We need to look out for her," he pushed, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. So, I did it. I quit my job, telling myself it was the right thing to do, the family thing. But days turned into weeks, and my job at the office turned into full-time housekeeping. Linda's health issues seemed to vanish when it came to critiquing my cleaning. I'd vent to Michael when he got home, but it was like talking to a brick wall. "She's just trying to help, Chloe. You know how she is," he'd say, brushing it off, making me feel smaller and more isolated each time. Every day was a marathon of chores. I scrubbed, dusted, and cooked with all the energy I could muster, but Linda always found fault. "You missed a spot there, just behind the couch. And use more elbow grease, will you? It's still not clean," she would say, her voice sharp, cutting through the hum of the vacuum cleaner. Cooking was another battlefield. No matter how carefully I followed recipes or tweaked them to what I thought were her tastes, Linda's verdict was the same. After barely tasting a dish, she'd push her plate away slightly and sigh. "Bland and tasteless, Chloe. You really should take some cooking lessons." Michael, ever his mother's son, only shrugged off my complaints. "Mom's set in her ways, Chloe. She just wants to help you get better at this stuff," he'd say, his words meant to soothe, but only adding salt to my wounds. His indifference stung almost as much as his mother's critiques. One fateful day, the old washing machine decided it had enough. I was halfway through a load of laundry when it shuddered, clanked ominously, and then stopped. Smoke wafted from the motor like a distress signal. The sinking feeling in my stomach matched the silence of the now-dead machine. Linda came rushing in, drawn by the noise. Her reaction was volcanic. "Look what you've done now. That was a perfectly good washing machine, and you've broken it because you can't even operate a simple machine correctly." Her words were like daggers, and her voice rose with every syllable. I stood there, the smell of burnt motor mingling with my rising panic. "Linda, it was very old. It was bound to break down eventually," I tried to explain, my voice meek against her tirade. "That's nonsense. It worked fine before you started using it. This is coming out of your pocket, Chloe. You're costing us so much." She stormed out of the room, leaving me to stare at the defunct appliance, feeling smaller and more helpless than ever. Later, in the quiet of our bedroom, I broached the topic with Michael, hoping for some support or at least a recognition of the unfairness. The washing machine broke today. Your mom thinks I should pay for a new one, I said, my voice nearly a whisper. He didn't look up from his phone. Well, can you? It would really help out. I don't have that kind of money, Michael. You know I left my job, I reminded him, a desperate edge creeping into my tone. Then ask your dad. He can afford it, he replied casually, as if I were discussing buying a new dress rather than solving a crisis inflicted by his mother. The call to my dad was one of the hardest things I've had to do. I dialed the number, each tone heavy with dread. When he picked up, his voice was a bomb, but it only made things harder. Hey, kiddo. How's everything with you? Dad's cheerful greeting twisted my heart. Hi, Dad. I'm good, but, I need a favor. Can you help me buy a new washing machine? Ours just broke, I said, skipping over the hows and whys. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the whole truth, it felt too much like betrayal. Of course, Chloe. I'll transfer the money right away. Don't you worry about a thing, he replied, his willingness to help both a relief and a burden. When the money came through, Linda oversaw the purchase of a new, top-of-the-line washing machine, boasting of its features to anyone who would listen. Before long, things went from bad to unbearable. It started with her asking for money to cover minor repairs around the house, a leaky faucet here, a cracked tile there. But soon, those small demands escalated into full-blown renovations. Chloe, this house deserves to look its best. We need to live in a place that reflects our status, Linda would assert, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to upgrade her living room or the kitchen on a whim. I tried to resist, to suggest we budget or delay some of the work, but she brushed off my concerns with a wave of her hand. The first few times I called Dad to ask for money, I felt a knot in my stomach. He always answered with a smile, happy to see me, even if it was just on a screen. How's my girl? He'd ask, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I'm good, Dad. Listen, I need to ask for some help. We've got some repairs to do around the house, and well, it's a bit more than we can handle right now, I'd say, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad never hesitated, always quick to offer whatever help he could. Of course, kiddo. I'll transfer the money today. You just make sure you're taking care of yourself, alright? But Linda's demands grew. One video call turned into weekly sessions where she'd hover in the background, making sure I looked presentable. Put on some makeup, Chloe. Look lively for your father, she'd command, covering up the fatigue that had become my constant companion. It wasn't just the house that was being transformed. Linda decided she needed a new car, something more fitting for her status. And then, clothes from branded stores, because appearances matter, Chloe. Each request for money chipped away at my independence and my relationship with my father. I felt like a puppet, reciting lines Linda had given me. She made sure I never had a moment alone during those calls. If I even hinted at needing to talk to Dad in private, she'd find a way to interrupt or end the conversation quickly. Michael wasn't any help. He'd come home late, often smelling of booze, shrugging off my attempts to talk about how out of control things were getting. It's what families do, Chloe. They help each other out, he'd slur, dismissing my concerns. Then I found out I was pregnant. It should have been a moment of joy, but my heart sank knowing how Linda would react. True to form, when I told her, her first response was not congratulations, but calculation. This is wonderful news. Think of all the things the baby will need. You'll have to talk to your father, we'll need to set up a nursery, and babies need so much stuff. Linda enthused, already listing things to buy. Her excitement wasn't about the baby, it was about the new avenue for requests for money. Make sure to look happy when you tell him. We want to make sure he's willing to help out with everything the baby needs, she instructed me before another choreographed call to my father. Sitting there, waiting for the screen to connect, I felt the lowest I had ever felt. I was about to bring a child into this mess, into this cycle of dependency and deceit that I couldn't seem to break free from. Hey, Dad. I began, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. I have some news, I'm going to have a baby. Dad's face lit up, a genuine moment of happiness in the charade my life had become. That's wonderful, Chloe. Absolutely wonderful. You know I'll support you in any way I can. Living with Linda and Michael had become unbearable, but it grew worse after the birth of my baby. The days and nights merged into an endless cycle of demands, criticisms, and exhaustion. Michael was hardly ever home, and when he did show up, his presence only added to the tension. You've really let yourself go, haven't you? Michael would sneer, eyeing me as if I were a stranger, not the mother of his child. You look like an elephant. I can't even stand to sleep next to you. His words cut deeper than knives, leaving scars no one could see. I cried most nights, silently, the sobs shaking my body while I tried to muffle the sound with a pillow so as not to wake the baby or attract Linda's attention. The baby didn't sleep well, up at all hours, crying more often than not. I was running on fumes, every day a test of my endurance. One particularly tough day, I was so exhausted that I fell asleep while a casserole was in the oven. The smell of burning woke me, but not before Linda stormed into the kitchen. What on earth are you doing? You're wasting food, Chloe. Do you know how hard I work to provide for this family? Linda screamed as she yanked the blackened casserole from the oven. I just fell asleep for a moment. I didn't mean to, I stammered, trying to apologize. No excuses. You're not eating today. Maybe that will teach you to pay attention, Linda decreed, her voice cold and unforgiving. I was stunned, the hunger already gnawing at me. But worse was knowing I needed nutrition to breastfeed my baby, who depended entirely on me. Yet, I felt powerless to argue with her, the fear of further reprisal keeping me silent. That same night, Michael came home drunk. He stumbled through the door, his eyes barely focusing on me as I tried to soothe our crying baby. Can't you keep that child quiet? He barked, his voice laced with venom. I'm trying, Michael. He's just fussy tonight, I said, my voice weary, holding our baby a little closer. Unsatisfied and belligerent, Michael pushed me, his hand shoving against my shoulder hard enough that I stumbled and hit the doorframe. Pain shot through me, but my first instinct was to protect the baby in my arms. That moment crystallized everything for me. The fear, the pain, the desperation, I couldn't live like this anymore. Not for me, not for my baby. This wasn't a home, it was a prison. Michael's stumble seemed minor to him, but to me, it was the last straw. Waiting for the right moment to leave was the hardest part. I watched the clock tick, each minute stretching endlessly until the notification came, another transfer of money from my dad. It was then I knew I had to make my move. Michael and Linda were both out for the day, and the house felt strangely silent, almost like it was holding its breath along with me. I dressed quickly, pulling on my old warm jacket and wrapping my baby tightly in his blanket. Every movement was calculated, silent, the fear of them coming back early gnawing at my insides. I grabbed a small bag that I had packed days ago, the essentials only, some clothes for me, and the baby in diapers. With my baby secured in my arms, I stepped outside, locking the door behind me one last time. The taxi ride to the airport was a blur, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I kept looking over my shoulder, paranoid that Michael or Linda might pull up behind us. At the airport, I bought the tickets, my hands shaking as I handed over the cash. The amount drained nearly all the money I had, but it didn't matter. We were going to be safe, we were going to be free. I turned off my phone, cutting off any chance they had to track me down or persuade me to come back. Landing in Alaska was like stepping into another world. The biting cold slapped me awake from the haze of anxiety and fear that had clouded my mind. I hailed another taxi and gave the driver my dad's address. As we drove, the familiar landscapes of my childhood rolled past, each mile bringing a surge of memories and a flicker of hope. I arrived at my dad's house late at night. The porch light was a beacon in the darkness. With my baby now asleep against my chest, I walked up the steps and rang the doorbell. The wait felt like an eternity. Then, the door swung open, and there was my dad, his face etching from confusion to shock as he took in my appearance, exhausted, disheveled, my eyes swollen from crying. "Chloe, what's happened? Are you okay?" His voice was laden with concern. Tears streamed down my face as I stepped inside. "Dad, I had to leave. I couldn't stay there any longer. Please, I need your help." He didn't ask any more questions. He just wrapped his arms around me and my baby, pulling us into the warmth of the house. Carol came down the stairs, her expression turning from sleepy curiosity to alarm as she saw me. "Oh, Chloe," she gasped, rushing to embrace us. "What's going on?" I broke down, the story pouring out of me in between sobs, the control, the isolation, the despair, Michael's indifference, Linda's manipulation. They listened, their faces growing grim with every detail. Without a word, Dad stepped away and came back with his phone in hand. He dialed with a steadiness that belied his age. "I'm calling the police, and then I'm getting the best lawyer we can afford. We're going to fix this, Chloe. You're safe now. You're home." The courthouse was a blur of activity, but inside, the world seemed to slow down as I took the stand. Giving my testimony against Michael and his mother, Linda, was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. My voice shook as I recounted the details of the abuse and manipulation, but I felt a strength I didn't know I had, fueled by the desire to protect my child and reclaim my life. The judge's gavel sounded like a shot of finality when he fined Michael for his abusive behavior. It wasn't just a victory for me, it felt like justice for every silent moment I had endured under his and Linda's control. The divorce papers came through not long after. Signing them brought a mix of relief and sorrow. This wasn't how I had envisioned my marriage ending. But as I scribbled my name, I knew it was the first step toward a new beginning. Mr. Jenkins, our lawyer, was relentless. He dug through financial records and bank statements, piecing together the puzzle of how my father's money had been siphoned off to fund Linda's lavish tastes and renovations. The evidence was undeniable, and the court ordered that every penny be returned. The total came to over $230,000. Neither Michael nor Linda had the means to pay it back outright. The news of their deceit spread quickly among their friends and the local community, tarnishing their reputations severely. Michael struggled to find any substantial work after that, his previous employers distancing themselves from the scandal. In the end, they were forced to sell the house, Linda's pride and joy, the symbol of their greed. They moved into a small, cramped apartment in a less desirable part of town. Linda had to pick up a job at a local grocery store, a far cry from the leisurely life she had manipulated to maintain. Custody of my son was granted to me without contest. Michael was ordered to pay alimony, which he does, albeit begrudgingly. It's not about the money, though. It's about providing a stable and loving environment for my son, something I am now able to do back in the safety and comfort of my father's home. As I watch my son play in the yard, his laughter mingling with the wind, I feel a surge of hope for the future. The legal battles, the escape, the recovery, it's all behind us now. We've emerged stronger, bound by a resilience forged in the fires of adversity.